Okay, good afternoon, folks. I'm going to make a start on the meeting. I'd like to thank those members that are joining by Starleaf. We have Pat Sheehan, Doug Beattie, Martina Anderson and Emma Sheeran. I do see that we have Trevor down in the audience. I don't know if we can get him bumped up into the spotlight. Trevor is here. Trevor Lunn is here, and we have Christopher Stalford, who's just stepped out of the room for a moment. Given that there's only myself and Trevor Lunn in the room, I'm just going to run through those couple of housekeeping things that we normally go through beforehand. Not giving away any trade secrets or anything, what we talk about before we actually start the meeting, but just to remind members that today's business is a briefing by the First and Deputy First Ministers on the executive response to COVID and other general departmental issues. That we will then get an oral briefing from TEO officials on the assessment of the impact of Brexit on the institutions and North-South, East-West relations, and an oral briefing by the Executive Office officials on common frameworks. Before we move on, can I take this opportunity to welcome Michael Potter, who is our new clerk of the committee. Michael has taken over just as we've returned back in January and already hit the ground running. We've had a few meetings with various groups, sectoral groups, and we've done the preparations for today's committee meeting. So we've got a full team here, and Michael, we welcome you on board for the committee. So thank you for coming along. If members are happy with that, we will progress then to apologies. We've received no apologies at this stage for the meeting. If I could ask members then for item 2, the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of December at page 5. Are members content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of that meeting? Yep. Okay. In terms of matters arising, there's just a few matters arising from it that I need a steer from the committee. On page 11 of the meeting pack, there's a response from Michael Gove to the committee's letter on the 11th of November, where we asked for written evidence on governance of the withdrawal agreement post-transition, the joint consultative working group, dynamic alignment with the protocol, influencing EU policy, common frameworks, and the treaty and trade negotiations and intergovernmental relations. Could I suggest that a copy of that is forwarded to all statutory committees and the AERC and to the other legislators, as we have discussed with them throughout the last term? Okay, yeah. Agreement to that. And also, could I get agreement to respond to acknowledge the letter and to write to the department to be kept informed of this engagement? Would members be happy enough with that as well? Yes. Okay. On page 18 of the meeting pack is a response from Michael Gove to the committee's letter of the 4th of December regarding the Westminster Finance Bill. He's content to note that. Yep. Okay, and on page 20 of the meeting pack is a letter from the House of Lords European Union Committee to Michael Gove seeking clarity on the Northern Ireland Protocol in relations to trade. And it's important just for us to note that as well. Yes. And then finally, not finally, but page 22 to 23 of the meeting pack is communication between Michael Gove and the House of Lords Committee regarding future parliamentary scrutiny of EU policy and laws. Pages 24 to 28 of the meeting pack are responses to the House of Lords European Committee on Commission Work Programme and the Single Customs Window. These responses were copied to the Assembly European Affairs Manager, as it was felt that these would be of interest to our committee. Are members happy enough to note all of those? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, members, then we'll progress to item 4, which is the presentation from the First and Deputy First Minister, the oral briefing. If I could refer members to page 31 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. The First and Deputy First Minister are in attendance via Starleaf and will brief us on the response to the COVID pandemic and to other general updates from the department. So hopefully at this stage we will have Arlene Foster, First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, Deputy First Minister. Just as ever, the precursor that the session is being recorded by Hansard and the transcript will be published on the committee webpage. You're very welcome. Happy New Year to both of you, and thank you for coming along today. I'll maybe pass over to yourselves and then we can open up the questions after that.
You're not?
Yes, indeed. Maybe a bit faint there, Arlene, but maybe...
like maybe a bit again. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, that's better now, yes.
And I'm just going to see if my, is that better? Okay. So I want to thank you, Chair, and obviously members for the opportunity to host an event since our last appearance, which was way back in July of 2020. It has, of course, been an eventful period, and whilst in July we may have had some growing optimism about the prospects for a return to normal business, the subsequent resurgence of the COVID-19 has meant that it has continued to dominate and shape our work, not just in relation to the effort required from our direct response to it, but it also, of course, has had an impact on our capacity to take forward other areas of business. And I know that the committee takes close interest in the range of our business, and we're happy to take questions on any and all issues that members have. However, in the time available, there are a number of key developments over the past 6 months on which it might be perhaps useful to focus. EU exit, of course, victims and survivors, programme for government, and new decade new approach. I'm going to hand over to Michelle to do that.
Yeah, and just
Arlene, that is just, it's still very faint, and I'm not sure if it is an issue, but I know with those types of headphones, the microphone does need to be very close to your mouth to pick up things there, so I don't know, maybe if moving it a bit closer would help. Sorry, Michelle, back to yourself.
okay, and hopefully my sound's okay.
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. So also just to say thanks to the members of the committee for the opportunity to brief you across a wide range of issues today. This week also obviously marks the first year or the anniversary of the restoration of the Assembly and the Executive, and the focus on COVID from, I suppose, the early restoration was both unexpected and then obviously unavoidable. And I don't think that any executive committee has faced such a major challenge, especially so soon after the return of devolution back in January. And it has, without doubt, tested all of us in many, many ways. We're very grateful, obviously, for the support of the committee throughout the pandemic. COVID is clearly our priority, but nevertheless, it is important to note that despite all the pressures that there has been, significant achievements in other areas and the remainder of the mandate, we hope to build on those things. The First Minister has suggested an approach to discussion today, and we're happy to hear and to respond to what members have to say. Arlene?
Okay, so we're going to start then with Brexit matters. The committee is aware that the UK and the EU reached agreement on the 24th of December on the future relationship, and the future relationship bill received royal assent on the 30th of December, ratifying that agreement into domestic law in the UK. And while, of course, there are differences across the parties in the executive, there's also a consensus that it was in no one's interest to leave without a deal in place. Therefore, it's welcome that a deal has been reached. It's clear that this is a complex agreement and will require careful scrutiny by all departments and ministers over the coming weeks. And it's also much wider than just a trade agreement, which I think we all know. There's a wide range of areas from transport to security. Its implementation will be a challenge and most likely an evolving process, so it's important that we understand the impacts and opportunities that the agreement will provide, particularly in rebuilding our economy following the COVID pandemic. Whilst it provides for a zero tariff, zero quota deal, it does not mean that things will remain as they were, and that's evident from the first few weeks of trading that we've seen, and the agreement will be implemented and operate alongside the protocol, and there will be interactions between both that will need to be carefully monitored. And of course, we've seen difficulties with the operations of the protocol at present, and I'm sure we'll come back to those in the course of this hearing.
So undoubtedly significant progress has been made in terms of the protocol and in the future relationship agreement with the EU. However, it's clear to us all that there remain some operational issues which have the potential to impact significantly on our economy and on our people. And we are committed to ensuring that these are resolved as quickly as is possible. As I'm sure committee members are aware, businesses have indicated that there has been a disruption to goods coming here from Britain, and that's for two main reasons. The first reason being that the companies on the British end weren't prepared for the changes in processes associated with the protocol and therefore at a low level of readiness. And the second reason is that agri-food goods were usually transported as part of the groupage or the transport of mixed loads. So that's a major issue for our hauliers who operate to tight margins and turnaround times and worked in the single market, but may not now work in the post-transition arrangements. So the groupage issue also affects smaller companies who are not benefiting from the grace period for supermarkets. And we also are seeing impacts of the lack of preparedness of British businesses on the Holyhead to Dublin route. So you can see just in terms of problems, that's where that is arising. Most of these issues have obviously resulted in lorries being displaced, which impacts on the ability to send scheduled loads from here to Britain because the trailers are not back from Britain, and then this causes the viability issues which all of our businesses have been voicing over the course of the last number of weeks. We have stated very clearly to the Chancellor CDL that these impacts need resolved at a rapid pace, and we continue to raise our concerns at daily meetings of the Exit Operations Cabinet Committee that we or junior ministers attend, and through officials working with their Whitehall colleagues. We also have assurances that Revenue and Customs, Department for Transport and the Border Delivery Protocol Group are increasing their engagement with British companies, and they're working to find creative ways to reach smaller businesses to ensure that there's a greater level of readiness. Our officials are liaising with their counterparts also in Dublin and the Irish Government to resolve issues which are mainly related to the absence of customs declarations, and we will continue to press the British Government for resolution across all of these issues.
Maybe before you come in there, Arlene, I think we're still struggling with to hear you. I don't know if it's possible maybe just to remove the headset and just use whatever microphone there is on there. I know in particular Christopher Stalford can't hear you, and he does hang on every word that you say, and I think he's quite keen that you can be heard. So no.
There's no sound, Arlene.
Oh, okay. Maybe just. Might help if it's replugged in again.
No, Arlene, still no sound.
No.
No. Chair, do you want to? I don't know. Take another piece of business and then come back to us, or does that?
Yeah, maybe we'll take a 5-minute break, sure, to allow things to get sorted out. I'm happy enough to do that. We'll take 5 minutes. I'll just bring the meeting back into live session again, and we'll pass back over to the First Minister, who's going to continue with the presentation.
Okay, so in terms of the next issue that we wanted to address with the committee, it was victims and survivors, and in terms of the appointment of the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors, we've concluded the consideration of options for that post and have now instructed our officials to commence the process for the appointments of a Victims Commissioner. The appointment process, of course, must comply with the Code of Practice for Ministerial appointments, and we've asked officials to draw up terms of reference for review to be completed within 6 months of the office of the Commissioner, and those two are currently under consideration. Michelle.
Maybe we've lost her.
This really is a joint office, isn't it, Michelle? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you back again, yeah.
Apologies. So we have, as I said, we are committed to meeting the needs of bereaved victims and survivors, and indeed the groups themselves have highlighted concerns, particularly in regard to acknowledgement of the trauma that bereaved victims have experienced. So our officials have been exploring options to address the need to acknowledge what bereaved victims have suffered, which could be delivered by the Victims and Survivors Service. And we're currently considering these, and will reach a decision shortly.
So then, in terms of the Victims Payment Scheme, Justice Minister has indicated to the Assembly that her aim is to open the scheme to applications in early March. A substantial programme of work is underway with the Department of Justice. However, more work remains to be implemented before a scheme of this complexity and magnitude can become operational, but progress to date includes ongoing development of an online system to receive applications. A tender process for the appointment of an assessment service provider will conclude shortly. NIJAC is at an advanced stage of the selection process for an interim victims payment board. Accommodation has been secured. Department of Justice officials, in conjunction with TEO, continue to engage with all of the relevant bodies regarding evidence retrieval processes, and fortnightly engagement meetings continue to be held with the sector. In terms of the interim president, the Lord Chief Justice has announced the appointment of Mr Justice McAlinden as the interim president of the Payments Board. If I can turn then just briefly to historical institutional abuse. At the end of December, the Historical Institutional Abuse Redress Board had received 959 applications for compensation. The board has made determinations totalling £7.38 million and paid out £5.76 million of redress. The new president of the board is Mr Justice Ian Huddleston, who was appointed on the 8th of January as part of a periodic reallocation of judicial roles. The previous president, Mr Justice Adrian Colton, is returning to the courts to take on the role as the lead judicial review judge, and of course we would want to acknowledge the key role he has played in establishing the scheme, the first payments for which started to be made just 7 weeks after the scheme opened.
And just to say that I'm very pleased to confirm that Fiona Ryan took up her post as Commissioner on the 14th of December, and her role will be to represent the best interests of all of the HIA victims and survivors. There's no doubt that she has got many challenges ahead, such as work on an apology, a memorial, and ensuring that proper support services are put in place. So I'm sure we all want to take this opportunity today to wish Fiona well in her new post. A new package of support services was also launched with VSS, WAVE and Advice NI on the 1st of December. And that includes additional psychological therapies, complementary therapies, support for social isolation, support for people experiencing persistent pain. And to date, 82 survivors have registered with that service.
Okay, and something very much in the news today is the mother and baby homes, and the Department of Health, of course, is the lead on mother and baby homes, and ministers are naturally concerned at the findings in the report by the Commission of Investigation into mother and baby homes. The Deputy First Minister and I are meeting with Minister O'Gorman next Wednesday, the 20th, to discuss the Commission's findings, and in particular any issues which have a cross-border dimension. The Interdepartmental Working Group on Mother and Baby Homes, Magdalen Laundries and Historical Clerical Child Abuse, which has been chaired by Judith Gillespie, is currently considering the findings and recommendations of that report.
So the research into historical mother and baby homes and Magdalen Laundries here, commissioned by the Interdepartmental Working Group and undertaken jointly by Queen's University and by the Ulster University, I'm glad to say is complete. And we understand that a paper will be brought to the Executive shortly for consideration. And then, subject to the Executive's approval, it's intended to publish the research report before the end of this month, so the end of January. Alongside the publication of the research report, the Executive will also be asked to consider and agree recommendations on the way forward. The chair of the group has established a reference group, and that includes obviously a reference group of victims and survivors and also their representatives. And they clearly have to play an important role as in terms of this work programme.
And then finally, Chair, the programme for government, and a significant amount of work has taken place to develop a new outcomes-based programme for government. The programme reflects the dependencies and connections that exist between the different strands of public policy. The programme is something that we can all contribute to, and which has a clear focus on the things that matter most to people, of course, health and happiness and life satisfaction. But it's also one that will provide a sound and lasting basis for designing, shaping and delivering public services so as to achieve the best possible outcomes on societal well-being. At our meeting on the 22nd of December, the Executive agreed a draft outcomes framework for use as a starting point in a public consultation about the direction of the programme for government, and we expect that process to launch very soon. We will, of course, share the document with the committee as soon as we can. Our officials will be able to say more about the PFG development process and consultation when they attend committee next week, when they're coming to provide an update on NDNA matters, which of course includes the PFG.
Then in relation to the work that we're doing to develop the new outcomes-based programme for government, it's important that we get the wording of the outcomes right. And that is the critical first step, and that is why the executive is seeking to achieve, or what it's seeking to achieve in the forthcoming public consultation. The new draft outcomes framework is only the beginning of the conversation, as the committee knows, a starting point for discussion and I've no doubt for debate. The framework sets out draft wording of the outcomes and incorporates some early thinking around what the key priority areas might be under each one. The executive is also committed to working in a very joined up way to put in place impactful strategies and actions that tackle our most intractable problems and to deliver real and lasting change in the things that matter most to people. At the end of the consultation and when finalised, the new framework will provide a basis for a longer term policy planning by the executive and act as a touchstone for all strategies and actions in moving forward. That's our opening remarks, Chair. So
okay.
Over to yourself. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for that, and I'm glad that we've got our technical hitches sorted and we're up and running. I'll maybe start. As we've said, it's July was the last time really that we had the chance to catch up via the committee. So maybe if I could ask a question just about public messaging in terms of COVID. And public messaging and behaviour has been critical to prevent the spread of coronavirus in our communities. But do you feel that the behaviour of politicians has reached the standard asked of them by the public? I mean, does going to London when the advice suggests that we don't help? Does going for long distance walks well away from your home help? Does not wearing face masks help? Does attending large scale events help to curb the spread? Do you think that using your veto in the executive to prevent the necessary and essential lockdown that was required, and the lack of which has undoubtedly led to the further spread of the virus in our communities, did that help? And I suppose maybe just to ask them, do you regret some of the decisions that you've taken, and do you feel that you need to apologise to the public for asking them to do what evidently some in the political cohort have been unable to do?
So thank you for that question, Chair. I think we should all remember, including everybody on this call, that politicians are human beings and we're like the rest of humanity. And decisions are made which people probably need to reflect on in the future. However, I will say if you're making a political point about members of my party going to Westminster, they are representatives like you are. You're in the Assembly today. You've travelled up to chair a meeting, and of course that's essential work and needs to be done. Michelle and I have decided to not do that today. We're coming in remotely and we can see all the difficulties that are attached to all of that. It is very challenging for all of us to try and continue to represent the people that put us into these positions, whilst at the same time making sure that we send out very strong public messages around COVID and the need for us to stay at home and to do what is right at this time. In terms of the veto, as you will know, it's a mechanism that has been put in by the Belfast Agreement. There were no changes suggested to that in the New Decade New Approach, and therefore it is something that is open to 3 members of the executive to call for. At that particular point in time, you will recall that we were trying to give hope to hairdressers, people who were really under a lot of pressure, small coffee shop owners, and the decision was around whether to allow them to open for a week or not. I don't regret that because I think when you look at other jurisdictions and you see what has happened right across Europe and indeed the world, none of us could have foreseen the severity of what was coming down the tracks towards us, and that's what we're having to deal with now. I think that the executive and those of us who lead parties within the executives have always strove to have a proportionate and balanced approach to dealing with COVID-19. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, and we can look back and say there are things we should have done or things that we should not have done at all in this past year. But there will be plenty of time for reflection. I think what we're involved in now is trying to make sure that we lead Northern Ireland in a way that gets us as quickly out of this dreadful situation that we're currently in at the moment. And it is not without hope, Chair. I am delighted to say that Northern Ireland is leading the United Kingdom in terms of the vaccine rollout. It's wonderful to see that going so well. Our positive case numbers from a high of over 2,000 is now falling, and today is at 1,145. But that doesn't take away from the fact that our hospitals are under incredible pressure at this moment in time, and therefore there's a lot that needs to be done by those of us in public life to get messages out to people that they should stay at home as much as possible at present.
The only thing really to add to that is I think that there will be plenty of time to concur actually in this point. There will be plenty of time for reflection, and I think that given the challenges that we face right now, we have to very much be focused in the here and now, and that is the situation that we have, that our health service is under huge pressure, our healthcare workers are under huge pressure, the system is on the brink of collapse, and we took the opportunity yesterday on the joint platform on the Hill of O'Neill and Dungannon to just reinforce that message of stay at home, and we'd ask the committee for your support in doing likewise. I think that some of the work that we're involved in as the executive, particularly around the work of the task force, we very much look to strengthening the communications. We have our own, obviously, internal executive information service. We have all different departments trying to deliver on their roles within, in terms of their response to the executive. But we very much feel that in terms of looking to the future, looking towards getting us through the here and now, looking towards the recovery piece, that strategic communication was going to be a really key part of that, and I'm glad that we've been able to commission some work around the strategic communications, and we're actually working with SIB to be able to help us to move that forward. So in terms of today's committee appearance, let the public message be very clear from from myself and from Arlene as First and Deputy First Ministers, that our joined up message is to the public is to please stay at home and help us to get through this next number of weeks and try to alleviate some of the pressure that's on our health service as we deal with what is probably what we're in now, this period that we're in now, which is probably the worst position that we have been in the whole way through this pandemic. This is all of the nightmare predictions that were initially talked about back in March, all the worst case scenarios that were modelled. We're now actually living that. So I think for today, the message certainly is the message of please stay at home and limit your movements as best you can.
Okay, thank you very much for those seven separate questions that there were in that last question. I think no was the answer to all of them. So if I could ask then, what message do you have to the large multinational supermarkets who really are stretching to the limit their ability to sell non-essential goods when the regulations clearly state that they shouldn't? I mean, how do you think that local traders feel whenever they are prevented from selling items, yet their customers can go to larger retailers, often in the same town, and get the non-essential items from there? I mean, I think they would like to be able to hear those traders that you would understand the hurt that causes to many of them and their businesses. And as a question, is a mere guilt trip going to cut it with the larger retailers, or will you regulate to stop this from happening and ensuring, I suppose as it is, that there's a coronavirus retail level playing field?
Well, the executive is working our way through this, and it's more than mere threats, I think maybe is what you called it, or
guilt trip.
Guilt trip. It's more than that. We're actually looking at what else we can do, because we do. And we've had this discussion at the executive, all executive ministers have, including your own ministerial colleague, where we've been chatting out what else we can do to try to bring this in regulation if there is a way for us to do that. It's not straightforward, but we absolutely recognise that smaller retailers are being disadvantaged because of larger retailers taking liberties. So if we will discuss this again tomorrow with the executive, and we also have a roundtable discussion scheduled for Friday with major retailers around this very issue, which obviously is very topical. None of the smaller retailers who are doing the right thing and complying and keeping their doors closed, they shouldn't be in any way disadvantaged in terms of the larger retailers who are perhaps exploiting the flexibilities that they currently have. But if we have to regulate them, that's what we will do.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle and Chair. I mean, I think we've always approached this, Chair, in the recognition that what we're asking people to do is something that ordinarily we certainly wouldn't. And we've always asked people to work with us in a partnership. And that's true of whether it's been the churches or whether it's been with local government or with the Health and Safety Executive or the police. And that's why we're bringing people together to have that conversation, because we would much rather people recognise their moral duty in all of this, because it is wrong. And I've already said this in the chamber, it is wrong that small independent stores that are, for example, selling clothes are told to close by the executive. Yet those big multinational stores, which also sells clothes as well as essential goods, are able to continue to do that. And I don't think that's fair. It's not right, it's not equitable, and it's discrimination. So we will look to those companies to take action. They have already taken action, some of them by saying that they're going to enforce the mandatory wearing of masks. A little late for our liking, but still they have decided to do that, and we welcome that. So we would ask them to also look at their responsibility as large retailers to the rest of the economy in Northern Ireland, because it is not right that those small independent retailers who are receiving stock in for spring and summer now still have a lot of stock left in terms of their winter stock. So we absolutely agree that something has to be done, and we will approach this meeting on Friday to try and deal with these issues.
I think that would certainly be welcome, because there are, in terms of the moral outrage, I think there's even some examples of larger retailers closing down sections within their shop to make sure that the majority of what's open is actually essential, and then that allows them to sell essential and non-essential. And I think that has been particularly hurtful to the small retailer in the local towns right across Northern Ireland. So I think the movement on that would be very welcome. Ministers, you've mentioned already about the report into the mother and babies issues here, and that there will be a report hopefully by the end of the month. There is a small perception out there that maybe there's been quite a delay in this report, and I was wondering if you could explain to us, if there is a delay, what has caused that, and that if you feel that if the report warrants it, that there would need to be an apology and even a public inquiry, if required, into this issue here in the North, just to sort of acknowledge the significant damage and emotional hurt that has been caused as a result of that. Is that something that you would commit to if the report suggested it?
As I said, we expect to receive the report by the end of the month, and I know that a lot of work has been taken forward by Judith Gillespie and her team in terms of working with the actual victims and survivors. They have to be to the core of any decisions around what happens next. So I believe the executive will have this report by the end of the month, and I look forward to getting that and actually turning around a response very, very quickly. I think what happened in the South yesterday was appalling, that report was in any way leaked, that it was leaked to the public before the victims and survivors had sight of it. I think that was a further slap in the face, and just we need to make sure that doesn't happen here. We need to make sure that the victims and survivors are the first people to know, and we need to make sure that we take them with us. So whatever is asked in terms of the report, then I will respond accordingly, and no doubt Arlene will feel the same. I mean, it's really, really important that victims and survivors are at the centre of whatever it comes next, whether that be whatever is recommended by the report itself, whether that be a full public inquiry, whether that be an independent investigation, whether that be a statutory investigation, whatever that may look like. I'm prepared to do whatever is required to make sure that these people are no longer, these women are no longer denied the access to justice, which is what they require. So whether that be an apology, whether that be investigations, whatever is required, then I am determined to do that.
I think, Chair, it's important that we reflect that what happened in mother and baby homes and in Magdalene laundries isn't that far back in our history. And I think it is atrocious when you read some of the accounts of forced adoption and excess deaths that took place to those young mothers. And it is very traumatic to look at that. So I can only imagine the trauma that some of those children who were adopted by force feel now, and indeed the fact that they haven't, in some cases, been able to trace their mum because of issues around data as well in the Republic of Ireland, which I think needs to be looked at as well. So, look, I mean, I think Judith Gillespie, since she came in as chair, has made great progress. I think both Michelle and I were very taken when we met her recently by her energy and determination to get to the truth. So I very much look forward to her report. And whilst I totally understand that some people will call for a public inquiry, I think it's also recognised by others that because this is such a personal issue and such a private issue, that others may not want that to take place. And so we'll listen to all of those arguments and hear what Judith has to say to us in relation to what is the way forward. And as Michelle says, we will want to take that forward, whatever that is.
Okay, thank you. Finally, from myself then, do you accept that the empty supermarket shelves and major delays that there is to the haulier firms is a direct result of Brexit?
No.
It's what parties such as mine had warned about all along, and there was an opportunity for the UK to remain in the single market and the customs union and enable also the UK to meet its obligations to other agreements such as the Good Friday Agreement. Yet some of the usual no, nevers were heard, and here we are. So can I ask, do you feel that the current situation that we're in is a price worth paying for the freedom that you feel Brexit was going to offer us?
Well, of course, Northern Ireland is not having the freedom that we should have under Brexit because of the protocol. And of course, your party calls for the rigorous implementation of the protocol instead of trying to deal with the huge difficulties that have arisen because of the protocol. So I regret that deeply. Michelle will have a different view, of course, on Brexit, but let me say this, I think there are opportunities for us. It is a gateway to opportunity, but only if we deal with the iniquitous protocol, which is causing so much difficulty to the people of Northern Ireland.
Chair, just as you know, we don't have a shared view on Brexit, and you know that my view personally is that there's nothing good to come from Brexit, and that we've always known all along it comes with huge challenges. We also know that the people here voted to remain, so we have been taken out of the EU against our wishes. I think what we're experiencing largely in the last number of weeks has been directly as a result of, if you want to call it a trade and adjustment shock. It's very clear that because of the lateness of the deal and the detail of the deal, that on the British side there has not been preparedness, and the operational readiness has not been to where it should be. It's very clear that businesses on this end have been very ready because of the major implications for our businesses, but certainly from speaking with the business community and from speaking directly to hauliers, for example, it's very, very clear that the major issue of operational readiness on the British side has not been where it should be. And then we also have the other issue of groupage, which I referred to in my opening remarks, which is also causing problems. I am pleased to say, however, that our officials have informed us that the major retailers' flow of fresh food, for example, is now above 95% of the norm. So our food flow is obviously continuing to improve daily and should hopefully be back to where it should be. So I think that the reality of businesses in Britain not being ready for the new trading realities, and now our businesses are bearing the brunt of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass on now to the Deputy Chair, to Doug Beattie, if he can come in there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I hope you can all hear me. Arlene, Michelle, thank you very much indeed, and Happy New Year to you and to the whole committee. Happy New Year. There's an awful lot going on, and where I can absolutely see that nothing can stand still and nothing should stand still. And we're talking about Victims and Survivors Commissioner and the Historical Institutional Abuse, Mothers and Baby Homes, and the Programme for Government. I was just going to focus on two things, and that was COVID and Brexit, which I think are the two defining things at this moment in time. And I just wondered if both of you, the First Deputy First Minister, can maybe give us a sense, please, of where you see us in regards to the COVID lockdown. I know you are due to do an assessment on the 21st of January, and it's due to end on the 6th of February. But I'm just wondering if you could sort of maybe just sort of give us your sense. I know that in one breath we're saying that there's not much else we can do in regards to lockdown, and on the other we're saying, well, maybe there's other measures. But I'm just wondering, what's your sense? Are we likely to spread on to the end of February, like the CMO believes, or where do you see us coming out of this?
I think it is hard to say at this stage just where we're going to be in the 6th. However, we do know that we're in a desperate situation. As CMO and Ian, the Chief Scientific Advisor, have all stated publicly, it is the case that looks like we're on the other side of the peak of the number of cases. So we're coming down in terms of the number of cases for now because of obviously the restrictions that are in place. However, we haven't reached our peak in terms of our hospital admissions, and that's where the huge pressure is being felt right now. We had an executive meeting on Tuesday, and I put it directly to the Health Minister, just is there anything else that we need to be doing to help in the here and now, particularly taking the pressure off the hospital situation. And there was no recommendation for additional measures, for example, right now. But as we know, throughout the whole of the pandemic, this is a very fast moving situation, and sometimes you have to move according to the current prevailing situation. We will review the restrictions again if they're needed for longer, then they're needed for longer. If we can lift anything, then that's also what we will do. But I think as we speak today, it's very hard to give any kind of certainty around what post the sort of 6th of February will look like. If you're basing it on today's situation, then you'd say that it could be for longer. But I think we just have to keep an open mind as to what happens next, and then work along with the public health advice whenever it's given to us.
Yeah, so just to add very briefly, Doug, I mean, I know people want to have certainty, and we hear from different sectors quite frequently the fact that we haven't given them certainty. I wish we could have certainty. We haven't been able to have certainty now for a whole year. It is hugely frustrating. I'm on record many times of saying none of this is inevitable. It is down to personal responsibility and taking the actions to cut down on social contact, to make sure that we're not putting pressure on our National Health Service. Today, our COVID inpatients has reached the grand figure of 869. That's incredible. We were nowhere near that on the first wave. I think that's actually double, if not more than double, where we were on the first wave. So the pressure on our health service is immense. And I do want to take the opportunity to pay tribute to the resilience and the determination of our healthcare workers, whether they're ancillary workers, whether they're nurses, whether they're doctors or consultants. They have all stepped up, and you could see that at the weekend when the call went out from the Southern Trust and the Western Trust in relation to come in, please, we need your help, even if you're off duty. So, look, we will have to recognise the work of our health heroes after this is all over in a meaningful way. We know that, and we're going to have to step up and do that. And I think the whole Assembly would want us to do that as well.
And I think you're right, First Minister, and thank you both for that. And I wasn't trying to sort of to hold us to a time frame or anything like that. I suppose the big concern with people out there is, one, of course, we want to get business and society open again. Of course we do. But I guess there's also that fear that we do what we did earlier, and that is we open too soon or too quickly, and then we have to go back into it again. So I guess there's that fine line that has to be sort of danced along, just to make sure that we sort of look at this in slightly longer term than in the next 2 weeks or the next 4 weeks, and just make sure that we've got things in place. If I can ask a second question, please, and this will be the last one because I know others need to get in this, but I mean, I've got to be honest, it does annoy me that anybody is gloating about food or any other shortages in Northern Ireland. Whether you're pro-Brexit or anti-Brexit, nobody should be gloating that our shelves are empty, because the people who suffer from our supermarket shelves empty are the ones who go in to buy the cheapest food and they can't get it. So nobody should be gloating about this, and I hope people don't. But it is a fundamental problem. And I met with Hospitality Ulster yesterday and their supply group, and what they said was, I thought was quite stark, is that, you know, things were bad, but it's a good job we're in lockdown, because if we weren't in lockdown, there would have been 10 times worse. But what the Irish government did was they tweaked the customs checks and the regulations, very small amounts, just to be able to sort of free up that backlog into Irish ports. Is there no way we could do something similar here in Northern Ireland to clear that backlog and just make sure that flow is coming through slightly better than what it is now?
Yeah, so Doug, you're absolutely right. No one should be gloating, because it's people on very low wages who will be hit hardest in relation to stores like Iceland not being able to get their goods through. And I think that that's absolutely right. In terms of looking for solutions, which is what I'm currently trying to do, looking for solutions to all of these things, I'm pleased to say that today the government have confirmed that they have a solution to the VAT on second-hand cars issue, which I have been working on, because I think that that would have been incredible, to double taxation essentially for people who are buying cars from Great Britain. So that has been dealt with. But you're right, we do need to find solutions for some of the issues that Michelle has mentioned in terms of groupage. I understand that the DEFRA Minister is looking actively for solutions there and hopes to come back to us in the near future around that. Around pet travel, which may seem like something that shouldn't be something of annoyance, but we all know that it is, particularly with assistance dogs, for example. I mean, we have to be able to have those dogs trained to come over here to help people who are partially and totally blind. And so therefore, we do need to seek solutions. It's why we need to keep pressing the government. You have rightly identified the fact that the Irish government were able to tweak and make relaxations. Why in heaven's name can't our government do that for internal traffic within the United Kingdom? It should be very easily done, and we'll keep pressing the government on that issue.
I think there are a number of challenges that need to be addressed, and that's why these meetings are happening on a daily basis to try to get the resolution point. And there has been some progress, but there is some things. I think there's a lot of unintended, or sorry, not even unintended, unexpected situations that are occurring. For example, this week, manufacturing companies have just realised that they're going to have a 25% additional charge in terms of buying steel. I mean, that is a huge implication for anybody's trading books. So this is something else that needs to be resolved. So we have been very much pushing for solutions, and certainly I don't believe anybody can gloat on any of these things. I think it's about, these are the realities of Brexit. These are the things that we're warned about, but they also are the reality for now. And given that they are, we have to find solutions to make sure that our businesses continue to trade, that we have steady supply of goods and services, and that those things continue into the future.
And if I could maybe just add something on to that, just get your thoughts on this, because I raised it previously, but clearly within the UK we have commissioned the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and they have it in the EU. And where that's okay now, what happens come the end of this year if the EU has not if they haven't commissioned that Oxford AstraZeneca? I mean, are we putting in contingencies if we have to get another load of vaccines from somewhere else because the EU won't let that into Northern Ireland? Because it's a category 1 good, isn't it?
And the Health Minister has actually written to Michael Gove about this, the fact that we need priority for our medical shipments coming across. Obviously, the vaccine is the one that comes to mind, but there are many, many others as well that need to be given priority. So we just signed off on that. I think it was this week, Michelle. We give the go-ahead for that letter to go to Michael Gove, and it's important that we do get priority for our medical goods and devices, because obviously we need to be able to protect our citizens within the UK like any other British citizen.
Yep. Okay. I think we're finished up there with Doug. Then we can move into the room to Trevor Lunn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Wish both ministers a happy new year, a better one than last year. Just to go back to the question of steel and second-hand cars, I heard Michael Gove before I left to come here today making a good announcement about second-hand cars. He was very definite about it. He didn't seem quite so definite about the situation around steel and the prospect of tariffs being imposed on steel. Now, he did say something about marginal agreement, and there could be a refund or it could be a relaxation of that. Are we fairly certain that that situation has been resolved? Because I didn't think he was definite enough.
On the steel issue, I don't think it has been resolved yet, Trevor. I think it's something that we'll have to continue to work on. Certainly, it looks as if we have found a solution on VAT on second-hand cars, but I think the steel thing really only came into our vision very recently. This is the issue where steel comes into GB, a tariff is paid, but then if it comes across to Northern Ireland, there's another tariff imposed because it's going back into GB again, and we're seen to be making goods in terms of the single market for goods here in Northern Ireland in the European sense. So we have to get that sorted out because, as Michelle says, manufacturing companies just would not be viable if that was to come to fruition.
And just to add, I mean, I think just to concur with what Arlene said, I think that what Michael Gove said today promised something on steel imports, but didn't go as far as to say what the solution is yet. So I think there's a bit more work to be done. We'll be meeting Michael Gove, actually, I think later today as well, and certainly probably repeatedly over the coming days. So we'll be making sure that we raise this, given the significance to the manufacturing industry, and even particularly it's right across the north, of course. And Arlene and I both represent constituencies that have very high manufacturing industry and actually produce some of the largest vast majority of crushing and screening equipment for the whole of Europe. So it's detrimental to all those businesses.
Yeah, just on to continue with Brexit, the supply chain to retailers in particular, it's no surprise I'm totally against Brexit and wish it never had happened, but I don't think that the effects of it are working out to be quite so serious in terms of stocking supermarket shelves and so on as we might have thought. I mean, I was in a major supermarket last week, and it was very obvious there were a lot of bare shelves. It was worrying. I can only say that somebody close to me was in the same supermarket this morning, and
not too close, I hope.
Two things she noticed, it's my wife, and two things she noticed was that the shelves were well stocked again, but she didn't recognise a lot of the brands that were on the shelves, and the feeling would be that our business is doing what business always does, and adapting to circumstances and finding a way, and that a lot of this stuff was actually coming up through the Republic of Ireland rather than across the Irish Sea. So,
well,
yeah,
there are two things, Trevor. In terms of the shortages that we've seen last week, I think some of those were related actually to the French blockade, which was nothing to do with Brexit and everything to do with COVID. You'll recall just before Christmas and the New Year, the French stopped lorries from going across because of the fact that they said they needed a positive or a negative rather COVID test, and so that took some time to work through. So we lost a couple of days, and that has now fed its way through because we're at the end of the supply chain, and we've seen the evidence of that. So it's not all protocol related, but that piece has now been rectified. In terms of other goods on our shelves, I did notice that Sainsbury had taken some of the Spar products into their shops in Northern Ireland. I don't see that as a negative, Trevor, and I want to tell you why. Sainsbury only get, I think, the dear Minister was telling me, a very limited number of produce is from Northern Ireland that goes into the supermarkets in Northern Ireland. And therefore, if they're increasing the number of products from Northern Ireland in their supermarkets in Northern Ireland, I think that's a really good thing, actually, because it shows that our produce is being able to take advantage of that. What I wouldn't like to see is that our consumers have a reduction in the number of ranges that they're able to access, and I think we've seen a little of that happening, and it's something that we'll be engaging with the supermarkets on.
Yes, well, I agree with you. I wasn't disagreeing with you, actually. I mean, it's a good thing that Sainsbury's are managing to access Spar products, and wherever they access the stuff from, I'm fine with that. Could I just ask you, you had a discussion earlier about the mother and baby homes. I think both of you would probably remember that we had a debate about this in the House a few years ago, about the Bon Secours home in Tuam. And it was Barry McElduff, Michelle's ex-colleague, who sponsored the debate. And a lot of the things that were being alleged at that time actually turned out to be quite true. In fact, in the Republic, it turned out to be a lot worse than what was anticipated at that time. Now, I know that Youth Gillespie, and I've met her over this, is doing an excellent job. I'm sure she will. But there's no border in this. I mean, these homes are organised by the same organisation, North and South, and the practices that have been revealed in the South are absolutely horrifying. There's no reason to think that it was any better up here. And some of these homes were still open in the early 2000s. At least 2 of them were. And it's hard to escape the notion that the only thing that will satisfy people will be the same as what happened in the South, will be a full public inquiry. And I acknowledge the work that Judith Gillespie is doing, but I think it probably needs to go further than that.
I think you have to come at it, Trevor, just in terms of the approach. I mean, Judith has done her piece of work, but she will make recommendations to us, and then that's where we decide in terms of what comes next. I just think at the heart of everything that we're doing, we have to have the victims and the survivors right at the centre of everything that we do. They should own the decisions that we take, and I think that to me would be fundamental in terms of how we would respond to the report. I think that it has been long awaited. I think the fact that Judith will be presenting a report within the next 2 weeks comes obviously very hot on the heels of the report in the South, and I think that so timing wise, I think that's a good thing. But you said yourself, it is harrowing, the things that happened, and the fact that it happened up until so recently is even more harrowing, because people think this is something that happened way back in the day, when clearly that's not the case. So we have to respond, I think, in a way that's both that is listening to the stories of the victims and the survivors, and we have to respond in a way that is responsive to their needs and with sensitivity and with respect, I think, as well, for what they've been through and how far they've come. So I don't want to jump the horse, but I would certainly say that whatever comes forward in terms of recommendations from the group, then we need to embrace it very quickly, and we need to turn it around into what is the next step, so that victims don't feel that they've reached a certain milestone and then things are parked again. We need to turn this around very, very quickly.
Okay. One more very quick one, Chair, you don't mind. It's just around COVID and the closing of schools, particularly primary schools. As you well know, the children of key workers are still being accommodated in schools, and I've been approached about a particular situation where there's quite a lot of very young children being dealt with in one of our prep schools, and the teachers are having to come in, and so are the classroom assistants, but they have very little protection. Is there a case for, in those circumstances, for people who are doing their job at risk in that sort of situation, to be prioritised for vaccination?
Well, Trevor, the prioritisation in relation to vaccination is set by the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, and that's where we take our lead from. And the reason why it's set by them is they look at all of the different priorities and information that they have to decide where they can get the maximum impact on society. And that's why our care homes and our over 80s were the first, because when we had a meeting with Jonathan Van Tam, who is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of England, he was able to share with us that if you vaccinate 43 people in a care home, that saves a life, one life. But when you go down the priority list and you move into, say, for example, and I'm not saying all teachers are young teachers, but if you look at young teachers, and if you vaccinated, I think he said a couple of thousand of young teachers it would take before you would save one life there. So they're looking at it from the point of view of saving lives in terms of vaccination and how they can get the maximum impact. And I thought it was interesting to hear ACC Alan Todd say today that he would rather see elderly and vulnerable people being vaccinated than his police officers. And you might think that's strange coming from a police officer, but I think he's recognising where the most vulnerable groups are, and particularly when you look at our death rates, where the most vulnerabilities are as well.
Okay.
I think just to add, Trevor, I mean, I understand why there's a prioritisation, particularly as you're dealing with having to deal with the vaccine as it comes in different batches. However, I do think there's merit in arguing for public services to be those people who are in the front line being vaccinated first. So I think that what we want to do and what we're trying to do even with our own task force in the executive is to try to make sure that we pull out all the stops that allows us to be able to vaccinate people as quickly as possible. And we know there's so much goodwill out there. You know, you have pharmacists playing their part, you have the GPs playing their part, you have your community nurses playing their part. You also have massive community infrastructure, people who want to get on board. So we want a speedy rollout of the vaccination, and we want to do everything we can, leave no stone unturned, in supporting the Health Minister to get that rolled out as quickly as possible and reaching all those people on the front line as well.
I think the vaccination is one of the good points in terms of Northern Ireland, so thanks for that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I do need to move on. And maybe just if you felt it was relevant, Ministers, if one of you wanted to take an answer to the questions as we progress, like the ad hoc committee, but if the other feels that there's an element to it, then it might shave a bit of time from the responses. I'm going to go to Pat Sheehan next. If Pat was there to ask his question, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to ask a question around the COVID task force and focus on that, and particularly around its objectives, its strategy and its priorities. Those countries that have been successful in combating the virus all have used integrated, coordinated strategies and a wide range of measures to tackle the virus. Now, it's my view, and I've been saying this all along, that the Department of Health doesn't appear to have an integrated, coordinated strategy. And some of the advice that has been coming from the Department of Health has been questionable, in my view. And the results of that can be seen now in the way our health service is under more pressure than it has ever been at any stage in this pandemic. And my fear now is that the Department of Health is going to put all its eggs in the one basket, and that basket being the vaccine. And there are difficulties around that. First of all, it's not known how long protection will last for after people are vaccinated. And secondly, given the high levels of transmission of the virus right around the world, scientists are telling us that there is a chance that this virus will mutate to an extent where it becomes resistant to the vaccines, the vaccine over time. So there are serious questions to ask about a strategy as to how we can combat this virus. And I suppose, that would include things like contact tracing, mass testing, and so on. And I suppose to cut to the chase, the question I want to ask is, what's the task force going to do differently from what has already been done in the past? Thanks.
Thanks for that, Pat. I think that each department obviously has their own policy responsibility, and health is responsibility in terms of the testing programme, the contact tracing, and all those things that need to happen. But it was very clear to ourselves that what we needed to see was an overarching umbrella structure that tries to bring together all the different threads. Because we're very clear in the view that what we needed to do is obviously deal with the here and now, but we need to look to the future. What does recovery look like? And certainly I would share the view of if you put all your eggs in the vaccination basket, even though the vaccination is our hope, as Trevor has just said, it is our light at the end of the tunnel, but there are different strains of the virus coming on, and thankfully to date none of those strains are resistant to the vaccinations that have been developed to date. But there's no doubt that that's going to, the virus will continue to mutate, and there will have to be different vaccinations at different points. So we can't wait to the summer. I suppose is our view that we can't wait to the summer until such times as everybody's vaccinated that we can get back to some sort of semblance of normality. So what needs to be focused on in the here and now is the issue of tracking and tracing. It is the issue of mass testing, as we have suggested on many occasions, because we don't want to be in this endless lockdown scenario. We want to find a way to try to open things up till we get to the point where people are vaccinated. So therefore, without trying to cut across existing ministerial responsibilities and accountabilities, what we tried to do was to focus on on what we can do to try to bring all the different threads together. So there was the task force was established and it got a terms of reference very quickly. We're working with Strategic Investment Board. They're going to help us in terms of what we can do around 4 key areas of work. One is the area of strategic communications, because clearly it's really, really important that we communicate to the public, but we also are doing a lot of detailed work around behavioural science, how to, encourage people to comply. We're looking at obviously the here and now. How can we support mass interventions around the vaccine, mass testing, and all of that? We're looking at adherence, so working with all those people who are responsible for coherence or compliance, even with the regulations. So that's not. We were at the PSNI Chief Constable yesterday. We'll be meeting with local government. We're meeting with all those who are tasked with trying to deal with compliance. And then finally, the issue that we're looking towards is the issue of recovery, economic recovery, societal recovery, health recovery. So this task force, we believe, will be the tool to bring all the different threads together and make sure that that it's resisted at all times, to put all the eggs in the vaccination basket and help us to move forward.
Okay, Pat.
Okay, can I come back in there,
Yes.
Chair?
Yes, of course, yes.
I suppose, thanks for that, Michelle. One of the things you didn't mention there was travel restrictions. And when the Chief Scientific Advisor was at the Health Committee last week, I asked him about the advice he had given to the executive prior to Christmas about unrestricted travel from England, and particularly the south of England, into the north here. And he was of the view that didn't pose a significant risk to public health here. Now, it sounded counterintuitive to me that the health minister in England was saying the virus over there was out of control, that there was a new variant that was gaining dominance, and yet people there could walk into an airport unchecked, unrestricted, fly to here, get off the plane, unchecked, unrestricted, and go about their business. And to say that the risk was insignificant, that was the scientific advice. I mean, if that's science, it must have come straight from the Donald Trump school of science, and some people would be forgiven for thinking that. But I suppose the Dublin government has now imposed restrictions of a kind, in that travellers coming in will have to have a negative test before they can get even on the plane at the point of departure. And is it not the very minimum that's required here in order to ensure that there's maximum north-south cooperation and protection for the island of Ireland in general? Thanks.
Yeah, in terms of travel, we have asked the questions, as you have asked the questions around travel, and the analysis from our scientific officer is that it isn't a big part of the spread of the virus, and so we take that as to what he advises, because of course we're not scientists, and we're certainly not able to second guess what Ian and Michael advises us on. And I have to say they have been spot on in relation to the modelling that has been in front of us on many occasions, and again over where we have been at Christmas, and when they told us that we needed to put restrictions in place on the 26th of December. We did that. I'm very glad that we did do that, because we're now seeing the benefit of that, Pat, because the numbers are starting now to go in the right direction in terms of the positive cases, and I think that is very important. I know the Health Minister has, on many occasions, reflected the fact that he has been frustrated with the amount of sharing of data between Dublin Airport and ourselves, and there has been ongoing discussions in relation to that. I think the Attorney General in the Republic of Ireland has indicated that there isn't a difficulty from a legal perspective in sharing data from ROI airports to Northern Ireland, and we would certainly like to see those locator forms and the information on those locator forms shared with us so that we can make an analysis in relation to people travelling through Dublin and then coming on up into Northern Ireland. But as I say, our scientific advice is that travel within the common travel area, which of course as the British Isles is not contributing in any meaningful way to the spread of the virus. And if you look at the fact that R is starting to go down, so from 1.8 where it was about 10 days ago, it's about 1.1, 1.2 at the moment. And the fact that the new variant that is present in the Republic of Ireland and in southern England and indeed in Scotland now rises R by up to 0.7. It is very much thought that the new variant is certainly not dominant here in Northern Ireland. It may be here in Northern Ireland, but it's certainly not dominant in the way that it is in places like London at present.
Just to add, Chair, I know you don't want us to double up on every question, but just to add that we will be meeting with or discussing on the phone with the Taoiseach later on this evening the current COVID situation, and no doubt travel will be discussed there. I mean, my personal view is also that we should be approaching travel in a all-island approach, so we should be maximising that north-south cooperation and using the fact that we are an island to our advantage. And I don't think that's been done sufficiently throughout the pandemic. However, I do think it's important that we have this conversation with the Taoiseach this evening and hopefully see if there's anything else that can be done in terms of travel or indeed any other areas of cooperation, because we're clearly in a very difficult position across the island, and the two health services on the island are under huge pressure, and it's important that we share learning, share approaches and do whatever we can to maximise that cooperation.
Thank you. And Chair, could I just respond very quickly?
Yes.
Thank you. And first of all, could I concur with Arlene around the sharing of data, that there are problems with that, and the responsibility rests with the government in Dublin, and it's disgraceful that issue of data sharing hasn't been resolved at this point in time. In terms of the scientific advice, and I accept that the executive acts on the scientific advice that's being given to it. My problem is that there are many other scientists out there who are given different advice, and we have the examples of international best practice around the issue of travel restrictions. And I think we need to look outside sometimes some of the advice that's coming from within the department. And even last week, Deirdre Heenan and Gabriel Scally, who are both prominent in the field of public health, published a 10-point plan in terms of dealing with this pandemic, which I think should go into the executive for discussion. So we shouldn't take a very narrow view on the scientific advice that's coming in. So there's no question there. Just thanks for coming in today and thanks for listening. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And I can say as well, Pat, there's nothing chills me more than the mere suggestion of a Donald Trump School of Scientific Research. That would definitely put years on you, the mere thought of it. And hopefully this day next week will be all that Donald Trumpism will be behind us. Could I ask next for Christopher Stalford? A Trump supporter?
I am not a Trump supporter, so you shouldn't malign my character in that way. I was about to say the Donald Trump scientific approach would be desperately effective if we ever run out of Domestos in the shelves in the supermarkets. But anyway, I do want to. I think the context in terms of the mother and baby units is stark. The report that emerged recently in 2017, the infant mortality rate in the United Kingdom was 3.9 for every 1,000. It's now been established by this report that the infant mortality rate for children in those institutions was 150 per 1,000. I mean, that is a scandalous figure that would not exist anywhere else in the world. And I do agree with Trevor that it's likely that on this side of the border, the figures will ultimately prove similar. could I ask the First Minister or the Deputy First Minister, when will we be getting an update in the House just on the progress that's been made in investigating this brutal treatment of women and children?
I was going to just say that as soon as well, just to concur with what you said, I think that we'll find that we are no different. What happened to women in the 26 counties is also what happened to women here in the north. So I think that whenever we receive our detailed information around what actually happened, I think that we will not be shocked, I think is the way to put it. But I absolutely concur with you in terms of how abhorrent this was. These were women who were forced into homes, forced into labour, forced into giving their children up for adoption, forced into their children being stolen from them. It's just beyond belief that this is something that was a reality up until recent days. I think that as soon as the executive receives the report, given the significance of the issue, then I think there would have to be, I'm sure Arlene would agree, that we would have to have it, whether it's ourselves or health or whoever, how that's done, there would have to be an executive statement made to the Assembly just to give members a chance to have their views expressed and to ask questions on it. But I think what's important for me certainly is that we turn it around very quickly and provide a next step very quickly for the victims and survivors.
I agree with the Deputy First Minister in terms of all of these things need to be victim-centred, and going forward any processes need to be shaped by the people who suffered. From my perspective, I have absolutely no objection to the state issuing an apology to those people, because the fact is that whilst these institutions were largely clerically run, it was the state in many cases that was handing people over to them. So from my perspective, I think the state absolutely should apologise. Related to that then is the HIA and the rollout of the recommendations of Sir Anthony Hart's report. Can I ask, in terms of payments that are being awarded, is there an established matrix for payments, and in terms of just like a sliding scale, so that people have an idea of what compensation they are entitled to?
Don't think we have that as yet, Arlene.
Sliding scale, I think it's determined by the board, Christopher, and I did in my remarks make reference to the fact that when Mr Justice Colton was in office, he did very quickly turn around those awards, and I think it was 7 weeks for the first one to come out, and that was very much welcome, because I think we all recognise that victims of institutional abuse have faced undue delay in getting justice and indeed monetary compensation as well. Fiona Ryan is now in post, and we look forward to working with her around the outstanding recommendations of the Hart report in an effective way. But again, it comes back to, it has to be something which is meaningful to the victims of institutional abusers. I mean, Michelle and I could issue an apology today, but I mean, the reality is we need it to be the right apology and a meaningful apology, and something that recognises what has happened to those people. And it will be the same for those people who were forced into Magdalene laundries and into mother and baby homes. And let me say this, Christopher, you're right, the state has a responsibility in this. The churches have responsibility in this, where they were church facilities. But when we look back, society as a whole has a responsibility, because it was seen to be acceptable that if you were an unmarried mother and pregnant, that you went into one of those institutions, and nobody batted an eyelid to that. So I actually think there's a whole piece of looking back at societal attitudes at that time as well, which we shouldn't shy away from either.
Absolutely agree with that. In terms of the HIA, the reason I raised the issue about a matrix is it has been highlighted to me that some people feel almost as though they're being bounced into accepting the lowest sort of band of award. So a low offer, a relatively low offer is being made to some people, and because they've waited so long, and because they're so frustrated, and because, frankly, especially in the current climate, if people aren't working or aren't able to work, they're desperate, and they will take it. So that has been an issue that's been raised with me by some of the survivors, and I'm just wondering, how can we ensure that the processes protect against something like that from happening in the future going forward?
Well, I think, Christopher, we will want to take that concern back to our officials and ask them direct questions around that now that you have raised it as an issue. I would have hoped that anyone who was applying to the board would have had independent legal advice in relation to all of this. But let us take your issue back, and we'll certainly come back to you as soon as we can around all of that.
Thank you. And just the one final question that I have, you will have seen, First Minister, and I'm sure Deputy First Minister as well, there has been talk on social media and actually in the mainstream media as well in relation to the invocation of Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. I'm not going to pick a fight with the Chairman, but I do find it funny that people who have argued for this protocol for 3 years are now encouraging the government to do the executive to do all that we can to ameliorate the outcome of it. I didn't argue for it. I argued for Brexit for the United Kingdom, but we'll not go there. Could you talk to the processes of how exactly Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol would actually be invoked? What are the mechanics of how that would happen, and does the executive have a role in that?
Well, it's for the UK government to decide if they invoke Article 16, and I thought it was interesting today to hear the Prime Minister say that he would not hesitate to implement Article 16 if it was necessary. I mean, I think the way in which the protocol has rolled out has shown that there is a necessity to looking at all of this again. There is a necessity to making sure that there is, and I'm quoting from the Article 16 protocol now, societal, environmental or economic damage to Northern Ireland, and therefore the conversations that we have on a daily basis will continue. We will look for solutions, of course, but if Article 16 has to be invoked, it's a matter for the UK government. There then is a role for the Joint Committee in that. And of course, we have, as a result of New Decade, New Approach, observer status on the Joint Committee, and I have to say it was very useful for us during the latter part of this year to be involved in that. But there is it's not a straightforward thing, Christopher, as I'm sure you will recognise. Nothing involving the European Union ever is a straightforward issue, but I think there definitely needs to be action taken by our own government in relation to this protocol, which is causing damage to the people of Northern Ireland.
But just to be absolutely clear, because I think this is important, that it's put on the record and it's in Hansard, the sole responsibility for the invocation of Article 16 does not rest with the Northern Ireland Executive, it rests in Downing Street.
That's correct.
Thank you.
And I just think also, just to briefly add, I think that whenever you have a problem, it's really important that you diagnose it properly. If you're trying to find a solution. And what we have here is the fact that Brexit was run right down to the wire. A deal was reached in the 11th hour. There was a failure to prepare on terms of the British side, and particularly in terms of supporting businesses in Britain who trade back and forth. So I think that the adjustment that businesses are having to make in the here and now is what's causing a huge number of these difficulties. And as I have said earlier, we are working to try to get resolution that helps minimise the disruption for businesses, as in all these things, as we've always said in terms of Brexit, or as I've always said in terms of Brexit, the best you can do is mitigate the damage, and that's what we're trying to do right now. This is why we've always said that Brexit was bad, and there's always going to be the problems that come with it, and that's going back to the point earlier today when someone talked about gloating, maybe the chair talked about gloating. It's not about that, it's about these are the realities of Brexit, these are the challenges which we have, and but for my part, I will work with the local business community to try to find resolution to the issues that are causing concern right now.
I disagree on Brexit, but I don't disagree. I don't think anyone could argue that the government's handling of the last 12 months has been an example of strategy and statecraft.
Okay, and of course, Christopher, we'll occasionally disagree, but we never
just
fight.
Occasionally.
We never fight. We never fight. I'm going to go back on to Emma Sheeran now, please. Emma, if you're there. There we go. Yes, hello Emma.
Sorry, it took me a wee minute to unmute there.
That's fine.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can indeed. Yes, go on ahead with your question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank both the ministers for joining us this afternoon. I know we've had a lengthy discussion at this point. I don't intend on keeping anyone any longer than they need to be kept. But I just want to bring you back again to the conversation that had been had between yourselves and several of the members around the mother and baby homes report that was launched yesterday in the 26 counties. And obviously it's very topical because of that. And there's been a lot of discourse in social media and in general media and the general public. Everyone is talking about it at the minute, and I suppose I don't think it could be underestimated just how widespread this was and how recent it was, and there are probably incidences of it in almost every family in the country, and that's north and south, and it is just horrific and it makes for harrowing reading. And the litany of abuses and injustices that were served on women and children, women, mothers, many of them still children themselves, by the state and church organisations working hand in hand and complicit with each other and working in collaboration. And it's heartbreaking particularly when you think about the fact that many of the women that had their futures denied to them and decisions taken away from them didn't even know didn't even know a lot of the time what was happening to them, and had come out of a system where sex education was minimal, and they probably didn't even understand what was happening to them for a large portion of their pregnancy. And it's devastating and can't be underestimated. So I want to thank you both for the assurance that you've given at the very start of this, that when we have a report in the north, that it's going to be victim-led, and the response from the state will focus on the victims and the responses from the victims and their accounts. Because I think what has been highlighted over the course of the past 24 hours, and what has caused and compounded the hurt by the victims and the families of the victims, is the fact that the language used throughout the report and the use of terms such as "this account cannot be verified," or this person's report of whether it be abuse or the domestic violence that happened in these homes can't be sort of backed up by any other evidentiary claims, and that is what has exacerbated the hurt that these people have went through. So just wanted to say that at the outset, and thank you both for assuring us that when we have this release in the north, it'll be handled differently. Thanks,
Emma, and I think we both want to be very, very clear that everything we do will be victim-centred, and everything we do will, in terms of what comes next, I think the victims and survivors have to be part of the design of what comes next, and we'll make sure that's the case. I think you set out yourself the experience of far too many women going through the trauma which they have been through at a point in time, to be re-traumatised by church and state by being denied information and access to birth records and just details of parents and everything else that came with it. I think the message that I would say to all those women, to all the victims and survivors, is that we hear you and that we see you, and that we will do everything we can and leave no stone unturned to uncover every bit of detail that we can, and to give you what you need in terms of what comes next. So we look forward to getting Judith Gillespie's report, and we hope to be able to turn that around as quickly as possible, and that we will be respectful, and that we will listen to every woman and their experience in terms of what has been their real lived experience and what has been a harrowing time. Thanks. I have one other question, Chair, if it's okay, and it's just around, I know that Monday we seen the first year anniversary of our New Decade, New Approach, and the resumption of Stormont. And I just wanted to ask for yourselves, and I know it's been 2020 was a difficult year and provided us with challenges that no one could have predicted, but what the big wins in terms of the aims from NDNA that have been achieved, and if we could get a bit of an update on particularly the language bills. I know that Ac Gaelic at this stage is sort of the goal was to have action on that within 3 months, and obviously that was waylaid by COVID, but just where it's sitting at the minute. Thank you.
So I don't think any of us thought that we were going to be faced with a global pandemic when all of those timelines were set in place. And certainly for us, we would have wanted to have seen more progress on a whole range of issues. And, you know, we do, of course, recognise that the cultural and language accommodation that was agreed in NDNA has to be dealt with in a meaningful way. And of course, we will want to deal with that this year. I think it's also important to say that whilst we haven't made the progress that we wanted to make, there has been some good things put in place, not least mental health strategy put in place. We've been able to start committal reform in terms of dealing with the courts. So there have been, and housing reclassification to allow more houses to be built so the private sector can build more houses. So there has been some good things that have moved along, not big headline issues that we would like to have seen moved along, but all the same, there has been progress made. So we will, of course, turn our mind to all of the rest of the issues in NDNA. We recognise that we have a short period left of this mandate. We will all be going out for election next May. So there's a lot to be done in the short period that is left to us, and we really want to get on with that. So once we're able to be in recovery position, we will be dealing with all of the issues that brought us back into this place. And I think that's important to say.
Just to say, I mean, a hugely difficult year on many fronts, but not least because of COVID and because of Brexit. I think that even despite all the challenges, the fact that we are 5 parties in an executive, which is challenging in itself, I think we have been able to make some achievements, and I think it's important to acknowledge those whenever they have been achieved, even, you know, regardless of the fact that we've been dealing with the 2 major issues. But, you know, there has been progress right across the whole range of departments, you know, the mental health champion, biggest shake-up in the housing programme, all the support we've been able to deliver for communities throughout the whole way through the pandemic, I think has been really, really vital. So I'm certainly very glad that we have an executive that's able to respond to the pandemic. We don't always get it right, and we certainly don't always agree, but we try our best, and I think the public want us to work together to try and respond in as best a way we can. But yes, there are things outstanding, many things outstanding, and we want to see progress in those and hope to see that progress over the course of the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you very much. And then last but certainly not least, we can invite Martina Anderson for her questions. Martina, are you there? We'll get you up into the spotlight. There we go.
Yeah, that's me unmuted. Thank you, Arlene. Thank you, Michelle, for your presentation and for the questions. Given that the transition period wasn't used as it was supposed to, I think the clue was in the word, it was a transition period, and to get businesses ready for what was going to happen at the end of the Brexit period, being kicked out for some of us against our democratic will. But do you believe that there will be practical solutions to some of the reports that we have been hearing in relation to food shortage? And what work is being done now to avoid any new challenges when the grace period runs its course in 10 weeks' time?
So I think, Martina, our companies here in Northern Ireland did do a lot of work to get ready. I think part of the difficulty was that the GB businesses that were selling into Northern Ireland hadn't done as much work, and they weren't as ready, and that certainly seems to be everybody seems to be on common cause in relation to that, and something that we're trying to rectify through communications and making sure that they do know what is required. So yes, I take your point on that, but I think it's more of a case against GB companies as it is against Northern Ireland companies. I think that they have known for some time that there's going to have to be, regardless of what happened, that they were going to have to take action. So, as Michelle has said, we do have daily meetings. Either ourselves or our junior ministers are on what's called an XO meeting to try and deal with some of these issues that have arisen. As we've said, we've been putting pressure on around the VAT on second-hand cars, so we're pleased to see that there's a solution coming in relation to that. So we're trying to take these issues by issues and look for a solution. One of the biggest issues is on groupage, and you will know that in haulage, when they collect different loads in different places, that is causing problems, and therefore we need to see a solution there. And it's one of the things that we'll be talking about when we're with Michael Gove later on this afternoon. So we're absolutely committed to trying to find solutions to all of these difficulties, and that's where our focus is at.
Can I ask about the peace funding? I just want some assurance that it's much valued peace funding across the board. It's going to be matched and continued going forward. And related to that, given that we've heard a lot about the Shared Prosperity Fund, I'm a bit concerned that there's discussions, reports anyway, of discussions going on in relation to the budget paper and some funding being looked for from the EU that's going to be lost here to the north out of other ministers' budgets. Given that the British government had told us that we would be going to get the funding replaced on the Shared Prosperity Fund. So where is that at?
So on the Peace Plus programme, there's a really good story to tell there, because actually the initial programme has been increased, and UK government recently announced that there would be additional funding of over 200 million. So that brings the total programme value to approximately £1 billion. You will recall the Irish government, ourselves, UK government put in the funding, and we had a discussion around some of the high-level thematic SEUPB proposals, which came to the executive just on Tuesday past, and we'll be engaging more with the Chief Executive about those thematic ways forward. So I think the Peace Plus story is a good one, Martina. In terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, we still haven't clarity in relation to that. We need to know about its competitive nature, because if it is a competitive fund, it's more challenging for us in Northern Ireland, as I think you understand. So therefore we need to get the clarity in relation to that, and I know the Minister for the Economy is pushing hard to get clarity on that in the coming weeks.
Okay. Can I make an appeal to you in relation to tomorrow's executive? We were told at the Infrastructure Committee today that there would be a discussion coming to you tomorrow, and I don't know about the reality of this, but this is what the officials told us in relation to the taxi drivers and the taxi operators with regards to a second scheme. And it's not that you would need reminded, but both of you, both Arlene and Michelle, you made a statement on the 24th of November, and Arlene, quite clearly you had sent a signal to the operators, taxi operators, private bus operators and coast operators that would face, you said, a significant reduction in demand in their service. And Michelle, you said the same for taxi, private bus and coach operators too, in relation to the negative impact. However, when the scheme was devised, the bus operators were left out of the scheme. And then there are some taxi drivers who temporarily suspended their insurance. And because of the way the scheme was devised, they were left out of the scheme. Now, some of them are shielding, and some of them, their own companies that they were dealing with, insurance companies, advised them just to take a temporary. So they have ended up that they are now being excluded. They're now being told they might, in a pro rata basis, they will lose some funding if they have, for instance, temporarily suspended their insurance for a month or two. So I would ask you, because it looked like in the spirit of the statement that you just put out on the 24th of November, when you told the taxi operators that they would get the scheme, and also that the taxi drivers unblock, and it seems to be there's been a lot of bureaucracy around it. It has ended up excluding some taxi drivers and the bus operators, and I would ask you if you would take a look at that please tomorrow, if it is tomorrow or whenever you are going to be dealing with that matter.
Yes, so it's taken some time for this scheme to come about, so we certainly can raise the points that you've raised with the Infrastructure Minister tomorrow with the Executive if she's intending to bring the detail of the scheme, so more than happy to raise that on behalf of the taxi drivers.
Can I ask just one final question, and it's in relation to an arrangement to be put between COVID patients between Enniskillen Hospital and Cavan General, for instance, if beds occupancy exists in one or other of the hospitals. Do you know if there's some arrangement being made? Like, we've heard about a memorandum of understanding, and Arlene, you've talked about it, and Michelle in the chamber at times, but will it sort of deal with issues like that?
I have to say, Martina, I was speaking to Anne Kilgallen, our mutual chief executive, and she didn't mention that. But I mean, obviously, and Michelle said this yesterday, if there is a request for assistance, of course, that should be looked at. And doesn't matter whether it's coming from us to the Republic or the Republic to us. I mean, we should at all times try to assist, particularly in such circumstances where they're under incredible pressure. That's the case.
Thank you both for that. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, members, thank you very much indeed for all of those questions, and to the First and Deputy First Minister for giving us nearly 2 hours. I suppose the key message for all of us is the issue of safety in terms of COVID. We all need to continue to do what we can to try and minimise our movements and to ensure that we follow all of the guidelines and the regulations that are there. I welcome maybe the leadership from our committee today, where we only have 2 members present who are very local to Parliament buildings, and as all MLAs know, unfortunately standing orders don't permit chairs to do so virtually. It has to be done in presence in the room, so that requires me to be here to enable the committee meeting to happen. So I want to thank the First Minister and Deputy First Minister for their attendance. I don't know if it is by default design or accident or the fact that you aren't in the same room, but I do have to say that I feel that your approach today was very harmonious and determined to try and address all of the issues. I think it's fair to say in 2020 that the public were rightly a little bit sick of all the fighting and the bickering, and I think they like politicians and they like the executive best whenever it is working together, that it is working and pulling in the same direction to tackle the issues that impact people's lives day and daily. And at this time, that most important issue is getting ourselves past this virus. So I want to thank you both for your attendance today, to wish you a happy new year, and to look forward to further contact with you through the committee as the year progresses. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Committee, I'm going to suggest just a 2-minute break, just for us to catch our breath and to get ourselves ready for the next presentation. So we'll take a 2-minute break, please. Okay, members, we'll make a start back again. Thank you very much after that short recess. We're going to move on now to item 5, Brexit assessment of the impact of Brexit on the institutions and North, South and East, West relationships. We have departmental officials present to update us. If I could refer members to pages 44 to 200 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers. And just to update you that unfortunately Andrew McCormick he's actually joining the First and Deputy First Minister, I think, at their next engagement, because we've ran over a little. But we have both Tim Losty, the Joint Secretary of the North-South Ministerial Council, and Lorraine Linus as the EU Future Relations from the Executive Office. I think if I could just confirm that is Lorraine that's on with us on the phone number there on the audience list. Lorraine, is that you there?
Yes, Chair, sorry, I've had difficulty joining by Starlink again. Can you hear me okay?
Not a problem, we can hear you now, that's grand. Well, look, we'll pass over to Tim and to Lorraine if you maybe want to give us a few words of an update, and then what we can do is we can move on then and ask a few questions after that.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies just for Andrew not being able to join today to lead on the briefing, so if you forgive us just for filling in where Andrew might have added a little bit more light and shade to.
Okay, Lorraine seems to have dropped down into the audience again. If we could get her moved up into the spotlight. That's you back again, Lorraine. Can you hear us okay?
Yes,
Sorry.
That's fine. So I wasn't sure how much you had heard at that stage, but just to say Andrew's apologies for not being able to join today, and just to forgive us a bit if we're just sort of filling in for Andrew, who might have been able to add a little bit more light and shade to the discussion. So first off, just to say, in relation to this being a verbal update rather than a paper, it's fair to say that there hasn't been a lot of substantive work done in relation to this area, mostly because we were not clear on the outcome of both the implementation of the protocol and the decisions that were made by the Joint Committee on the 17th of December have been helpful in that regard. And secondly, on the outcome of the future negotiations with the EU. And as you're aware, that agreement was reached with the EU on the 24th of December. So maybe if I just sort of start at the very highest level of the East-West relationships and perhaps start with the Intergovernmental Review, or IGR. On the 14th of March 2018, the Joint Ministerial Committee agreed that officials would review on the existing intergovernmental structures, including the Memorandum of Understanding, to ensure that they were fit for purpose. This was really brought forward because of the UK's impending exit from the EU. Since that time, officials from TEO have been participating at official level in the discussions on the review, and on the basis that any agreement would need to be referred to the Executive for final endorsement. Now, in the absence of plenary meetings of JMC, these discussions have to some extent been included in the agenda of JMC-EN, but there has been a growing consensus that among administrations that these issues should be discussed at IGR ministerial quadrilateral meetings in the absence of discussion of a future meeting of JMC plenary or its replacement forum. So the latest quadrilateral meeting of ministers took place on the 10th of September, at which it was agreed that good progress has been made, but ministers tasked the project board to bring forward all proposals together into one paper and produce a second paper with a little bit more detail on the critical path for delivery. And a draft of this paper is currently being finalised. And it's intended that these papers will be completed in time for the next ministerial quadrilateral meeting in the coming weeks, which will be hosted by the Scottish Government. However, ministers have had the opportunity to discuss issues at some of the JMC-EN meetings, most lately on the 3rd of December. In relation to the British-Irish Council, Brexit has been discussed at previous BIC summits under the agenda item of political developments. And BIC is not a negotiating or decision-making forum, so discussion there has principally consisted of each member government commenting on the implications of particular aspects of Brexit for itself. And the Council has agreed that the next BIC summit will be hosted by the Northern Ireland Executive in June 2021 and will reflect the priority issues for the members at that time. At this stage, I just want to bring in Tim to do a verbal update on the North-South ministerial elements, and then I'll come in again on some other aspects of Brexit after that.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Chair. Can you see and hear me okay?
We can indeed, Tim. Yes, good to see you.
Yeah. Thank you. Good to see you all. So we do believe that in the North-South Ministerial Council, we have a structure which brings together the decision makers in each of our jurisdictions in some of the key areas of mutual benefit. So it does make sense, we feel, to utilise this forum to address a number of the challenges that may arise due to Brexit. Shortly after the referendum in July 2016, the NSMC agreed to work together to ensure that Northern Ireland's interests are protected and advanced, and the benefits of North-South cooperation are fully recognised in any new arrangements which emerge as regards the future relationship with the European Union. Then following the restoration of the executive, there was a plenary meeting held in July 2020, and at that meeting the Council again discussed the implications of Brexit and recognised the common interest of both jurisdictions to minimise disruption to trade and economic activity, and the role that we could play in this. So between October and December 2020, NSMC held 12 sector meetings, and the impact of Brexit was included as an agenda item in all of those meetings. The Council has also established a group of senior officials from the Executive Office, the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of the Taoiseach to consider Brexit issues in the future. A specific role has also been conferred on the NSMC in terms of referring proposals to the Specialised Committee, which has been established on issues related to the implementation of the Ireland Northern Ireland Protocol. And the Council has been asked, the Council has asked officials to develop a mechanism for the Agreement of Ministers for referring proposals to that Specialised Committee. We've also held meetings between the North-South bodies and their sponsor departments to determine the impact of Brexit on their operations currently and in the future. And there is a great deal of cooperation that goes on with the bodies and with their sponsoring departments to identify and address any issues. And there is, I can confirm, a lot of cooperation and commitment to cooperation going on across the board with the NSMC bodies. So I'm not sure, Lorraine, if you want to finish on anything from your side.
Yes, Tim, if I could just sort of add our experiences in, particularly in our relationships with North-South, and a key challenge that we've had over the last while has been the need for both the Executive and the Irish Government to respect the negotiating positions of both the EU and the UK. And that has resulted in an arm's length relationship between both sides while the negotiations were ongoing. And with the conclusion of the negotiations and agreement, it is hoped then that the relationships north and south can improve. And in fact, we've already seen a better opening of relationships since the agreement on the 24th of December. I just wanted to add a couple of other things just in relation to the Brexit subcommittee. As one of the structures, it's in line with the commitment in the New Decade New Approach Agreement. It established a Brexit subcommittee. That Brexit subcommittee was subsequently replaced by the Executive Committee dealing with EU exit matters during 2020. And the role of that committee will then need to be considered further as we understand the implications of the future relationship that has been agreed between the UK and the EU. And then just one final point, which would be on the legislation, which would be of interest to the committee as well. The legislative work programme that had gone on prior to the end of the transition period was prioritised. There was the deprioritised legislation. Some of that was put towards the end of after the transition period, and we'll be working with departments over the coming weeks to work out the tail of that legislation and the implications that will have for the Assembly committees as well. So that's a very quick overview of the main structures and where we are on each of them, and Tim and I would be happy to try and answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much. And given the lateness of this session, I'm sure all members will curtail questions and we'll keep them as brief as possible. The two connected issues that I wanted to raise myself was just that given, I mean, you've made reference there that during the process that there was some difficulties with both North and South being on different sides in the negotiations, and that would have had an impact. But I'm thinking really of the groups that are on the ground that maybe are working with each other and that have North and South, particularly in border areas, but if they're encountering problems now as a result of Brexit and the completion of the transition programme, there's no joint consultative working group established as far as I know yet, which would be a forum for their concerns to have them addressed by the specialised committee. Likewise, the North-South Ministerial Council is an opportunity to put forward issues as well, but given that that requires agreement North and South and agreement within the Executive in the North, which may not be the easiest to achieve, I'm concerned that the voices of groups on the ground may not make it through to the committees that are able to impact change in the issues and the concerns that they have. But what advice do you have for groups that find themselves in that situation? And do you have any indication of when the Joint Consultative Working Group will be populated and start meeting to give a voice for the sectors?
Sure, maybe if I could try and answer the question in relation to working with the groups. As I mentioned in the introduction, we had 12 sector meetings, which covered a lot of the areas of North-South responsibility, and also met with the NSMC bodies. And what we've been doing is getting information via the departments and via the organisations as to what was happening with the stakeholders and the groups that they were interacting with. So we were getting information from them and fitting it into those sector meetings. And where there was the potential to resolve a lot of the issues there at that sector meeting, the departments would make that decision. I would say from observing those meetings that they were very positive. Ministers and departments engaged very positively in addressing a lot of these issues. So there was an avenue there for groups to raise any issues and concerns. Through the North-South Ministerial Council Secretariat, we would also meet from time to time with the various council groupings, the Chambers of Commerce and community organisations. So we also see ourselves as having an ability to listen to what's happening at a grassroots level, and we will raise those with the relevant department or organisation and see if they can take those issues forward. So that there are a number of sounding boards for a lot of those groups on the ground to bring their issues to the NSMC and to the departments and ministers. And there's also a number of organisations, including the Institute for Cross-Border Studies, as well as universities and other think tanks to meet with us and also to make us aware of issues. So, as I say, it may not be 100% perfect, but it is certainly an attempt to try and get a lot of that information from groups and then signpost it to the relevant organisations.
It sounds very informal. We'll find out what the issues are, pass it to the department, and hopefully they'll address it. But it's that ability to get something on the agenda of the specialised committee and eventually to the joint committee, which requires the formalised structures. And are those formalised structures not available at the minute, or is it just a case of that you hope just to sort them out informally?
Well, we would try to address a lot of those issues by signposting them to the relevant departments, but we're also establishing a Brexit group of senior officials who will also be able to consider any issues that don't have a home, as it were. And then through that grouping, there would be, we will be looking at how we can formally then raise them back through our government systems here and then on to any of the committees that have been established to look at these issues. So, as Lorraine was saying, we weren't able to fully establish that group prior to the agreement on the 24th of December. We've had a number of discussions with colleagues in DFA and the Taoiseach's office. I've actually had a meeting with them there this morning, and we are looking at the membership and the sort of issues that group will be taking forward in the future. And then we will see that group as having a very, very strong role in dealing with any of the consequences of Brexit.
Okay.
Chair, could I maybe just come in on your other point on the Joint Consultative Working Group that sits under the Specialised Committee? Just to say that, you know, we understand that this is still under consideration by the UK and the EU, and expect that there will be more substantive discussions on how this will operate later this month. I mean, the rules of procedure have been published, but not, you know, how this group will operating. I mean, under the rules of procedure, the UK and the EU will have official delegations and may invite experts if both sides agree. So there's still a lot of work to be done on how the JWC will operate, and it's an issue that within TO that we're raising on a regular basis with UKG, because it's very important in relation to the management of the protocol, and in particular the legislation that sits under Annex 2 of the protocol.
Okay, thank you very much for those responses. I'm going to pass now to Martina Anderson, who I see has got her hand up for a question there. If we can get Martina up into the spotlight, then we can get the questions. You're muted there, Martina. I don't know if it's yourself that's muted or if it's muted at our end.
There you are.
There you go.
Unmuted now. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Tim, good to see you again. It's been a while. Can I ask in relation to the Specialist Committee on the matter of the service industry? I think that's going to be hit very hard. It doesn't appear in the protocol. And some in the industry feel that they've been left sort of high and dry in relation to the withdrawal agreement and the arrangement. So is there an opportunity to have something like that dealt with by the Specialist Committee, who can filter that through to the joint working group or the joint committee, however that is going to proceed? Because we need to find a home for this industry to be given some attention. Obviously, at the moment, people are looking at trade and all that's happening in terms of the end of the transition and how that wasn't really prepared for too well. So where can we locate that? And as a committee, how can we monitor how that's been taken forward?
Sorry, can I just clarify again, Martina, because I lost a bit of connection there. Is this in relation to services? Services,
yes.
Yeah. Well, services aren't part and parcel of the protocol. There's obviously a read across in terms, because the protocol covers goods and not services. So one of the things we'll be looking to is what has been agreed within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. There's a range of agreements within there. Obviously, there's financial services, but there's also a chapter on ordinary services within there as well. Now, there's a range of governance structures that will be set up to oversee the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and we're currently looking at those. I mean, it's a complex agreement, and you'll appreciate that staff at the minute are very, very focused on the operational delivery issues since the end of the transition period. But the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have already expressed to JMCEN their desire to be represented on the governance structures covering the Trade and Cooperation Agreement as well, given the benefit that they had felt from their participation in the Joint Committee and the Specialised Committee. And I'm certain that that will be the position of Scotland and Wales in this as well. So there's a lot of work to do, first of all, in understanding what the impact of the services agreement is, and then secondly, how we can be involved on the various levels of governance within that, which is quite substantial within the agreement. And it's going to take a bit of time to work through that.
Can I ask if the mutual recognition of qualifications is going to be dealt with as part of that?
MRPQ is one of those areas where obviously the TCA wasn't as good as it could have been in that area. What is agreed is what is in the Canada deal. So it's a pathway, more or less, or a framework to MRPQ. So for specific issues such as MRPQ, we will be needing to look at what does the TCA provide, what does the, and I skipped all the letters, what does the future relationship provide, what does the common travel area provide, where do we need additional bilateral engagement with Ireland, where will there be perhaps from profession to profession. So there's elements in there now that we have all of these agreements, including the common travel area, so that we need to look at where the gaps are and then look through which mechanism we seek to address those.
I can foresee difficulties because the common travel area is not in legislation, it's built in sand. There's going to be difficulties unless we give that some legislative standing. And it's just something, Chair, I think the mutual recognition of professional qualifications is something we need to keep an eye on. When we talk in language of RPQ and that, people wouldn't maybe understand as much perhaps what we're talking about, but we need to try and make sure that people understand that we are scrutinising this matter for them. Can I ask in relation to, I asked the two ministers when they were in front of us, they obviously had a lot of questions, But can I ask again about the grace period? We've only 10 weeks of this grace period, and we know there could be challenges if work isn't done in the interim. So what work's going to be done over the next 10 weeks as we head to the end of this grace period, given that the Assembly unfortunately didn't agree to the extension of a transition? We probably wouldn't have got it anyway because the British government wouldn't have argued for it. But that said, we have a transition now for 10 weeks. And I'm concerned about what's going to happen at the end of that.
Yeah, I would say a little bit about the grace period. Yes, there are a number of grace periods within what was agreed within the protocol. And obviously, those present further challenges this year. So, as I think the First Minister and Deputy First Minister said, we'll be working very closely with both the businesses and the industry, and also with the government to make sure, we recognise that those are potential other readiness issues that are coming further down the line. So those are all on our radar in terms of issues that need to be addressed, and the regular meetings like today, that they're already on the radar, and you will have seen from the questions even in the House of Parliament today, they're on the mind of FM and DFM and of businesses here and also of the government. So they're already being raised regularly in terms of how those are going to be addressed.
And Chair, I think it's something we have to keep on our agenda because it's only 10 weeks and the clock's going to start ticking. So let's not run to the end of that and have another kind of reaction like we had maybe over the last few days around trade and adjustment shock and that. So we need to be seen to be putting in the work and actually doing that. Can I ask Tim, in relation to the North-South Ministerial Council, particularly in relation to the common framework? Tim, one thing that I'm noticing sometimes when the officials present in front of us and when they're talking about the common framework, they don't deal with the third principle, which is going to ensure the recognition of social and economic linkages between the North and South and adhere to the Good Friday Agreement, and particularly in the respect of the devolution settlement, as it's called, as well, because when you go through the framework and you start to realise that in the agreement that the British government can freeze the competency of the Assembly in terms of policy areas that are subject to what they might say the common framework. So what kind of discussions has taken place in the NSMC with regards to the common framework and the implications of that common framework? Because it can't just be a common framework for Britain and here. It's a common framework across this island, particularly in the context of the North-South Ministerial Council.
Well, since I've been involved with the NSMC from September, our primary focus has been on getting the sector meetings, plenary and institutional meetings up and running again. And that was the first priority, and under that it included both Brexit and COVID issues. We're now at a situation where we have more information in relation to what's happening with Brexit. So as we move forward with both the senior officials group and other issues that need to be discussed with both the Irish Government Department of Foreign Affairs, Taoiseach's office and that, and then also looking at the British-Irish dimension, we will start to focus a lot more on those issues, and we will be taking the lead from ministers on those.
Can I ask him, the institutionalised meeting, is there a date set for an institutional meeting, the NSMC?
The institutional meeting, sorry. We had an institutional meeting on the 16th of December, and the Deputy First Minister will be making a statement on that at the Assembly next week. We also had a plenary meeting, NSMC plenary meeting, on the 18th of December, and Deputy First Minister will also make a statement in relation to the outcome of that meeting.
Okay, Chair, given the time it is and everything else, I appreciate what we've got so far, but there's a couple of matters I think, Chair, we need to just keep on our agenda as we're moving forward, particularly in the next 10 weeks, but also the issue of services and then the common framework, a third principle. Those are three that I would be keen to have some focus and attention on as we go forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Martina. I don't have any other indications for questions. I'll just maybe give an opportunity if there's anybody online that wants to indicate by putting their hand up on using the hand up mechanism. Sound right? But Okay, so look, what we'll do at this stage for this segment is to thank Tim and to thank Lorraine for their input. It's an issue that's obviously going to grow as the year goes by, and I've no doubt that we'll have you back again at some point for future updates. But thank you for coming today with this update. That's been appreciated. And I know, Lorraine, you're hanging on for the next session with us. So if you're happy enough, I'll just do the bits in advance of bringing you in.
Thank you, Chair.
So, folks, we'll move next to item 6, which is the Brexit update on common frameworks. This is an oral evidence session with the departmental officials. On page 202 of the meeting pack and page 6 of the table pack are the relevant papers. In the table pack, the response from the Executive Office to the Committee's letter of the 16th of December, highlighting concern in relation to the scrutiny of common frameworks by the Assembly. Now, if you're happy, we would like to copy this response to the relevant Assembly committees, asking them to notify the Executive Office Committee if there's any future issues going forward. Would members be in agreement to that?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, probably somewhat easier to get consent given that none of the other members can talk. But I am sure that if any of them do have an issue, that they can let us know whenever at some point after. If I could then refer members to page 17 of the table pack for a response from the Executive Office to the Committee's letter of the 19th of November, asking if the First Minister and Deputy First Minister will give evidence to the House of Lords Common Framework Scrutiny Committee. Can I get agreement that this letter be forwarded to the House of Lords Common Framework Scrutiny Committee for information? Yep. I shall take the 2 members present in the room as a straw poll of all others, but again, if there's any specific issues with that with other members, they can certainly raise it when they're back online again. The departmental briefing paper, page 3 of the table pack, was received at 9:44 a.m. this morning. Apologies for the late forwarding of that to members, but we only received it today, which is interesting given that later on we do have a response in our written correspondence from the First and Deputy First Minister telling us that they will endeavour to ensure that all papers are supplied to us in a timely manner. So I'll let you deal with that piece of fiction later on whenever we raise it, as we've got our third item of our agenda today and we have breached the rule again. Anyway, forby that, I will take the opportunity to welcome back again Lorraine Linus, the EU Future Relations Department from the Executive Office, and I am hoping that we have Stephen Hamilton from the same division and Michael Williamson also from the same division. If I can just advise all of you that the session is being recorded by Hansard and the transcript will be published on the committee webpage. Members, if you're all on board with this, Lorraine, is it yourself taking the lead in this?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me okay? Yes.
Yeah, we can indeed. So I'll pass over to yourself then.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the introductions and the opportunity to provide the committee with an update on common frameworks today. The committee was last updated on the 7th of October, and as you've mentioned, a short briefing paper is provided on the progress that's been made since our last briefing. And I just want to take the opportunity to apologise that the paper has only been received by the committee just prior to the meeting. And considering the progress on the development of the individual common frameworks, it's also important to recognise the major events that have occurred in the last few weeks that will have a significant impact on the development of common frameworks in the coming year. And these include, as I mentioned in the previous presentation, the key decisions on the implementation of the protocol, which were agreed by the Withdrawal Agreement Joint Committee on the 17th of December. On the same day, the Internal Market Act was given royal assent, and the UK and EU reached agreement on its future relationship on the 24th, and that passed into law on the 30th of December. And then, of course, since then, we've had the end of the transition period on the 31st of December. In addition to the briefing provided, the 9th EU Withdrawal Act and Common Framework Statutory Report has been published by the Government on the 10th of December, and this is a good source of information and sets out the UK position on the development and implementation of the Common Frameworks between June and September of last year. In terms of progress since the last briefing, the main activity was the completion of Stage 3 of the priority frameworks As set out in the paper, the review and assessment process was completed mid-November for 35 outlined frameworks. This process assessed a range of criteria for each framework, including governance, impact on the internal market, dependency on the outcome of the future relationship negotiations, and stakeholder engagement. It also considered the specific circumstances for Northern Ireland, in particular adherence to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the economic and social linkages between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and whether there was an impact on areas identified for North-South cooperation and implementation through NSMC, and how they would operate with the protocol. Following the completion of the review and assessment process, the common frameworks were approved by the respective departmental ministers and have been submitted for provisional confirmation by JMCEN. 3 frameworks did not complete the process, and the details of these are set out in the briefing paper provided. Throughout the common frameworks development process, it's been recognised that the cross-cutting issues of the protocol, the terms of the UK's future relationship with the EU, the internal market, and to a degree the outcome of the Intergovernmental Relations Review would affect the final form of the majority of the frameworks. However, development could not be delayed until these issues were resolved, and consideration now needs to be given to the next steps in the process. Given the major developments, a stocktake of the Common Frameworks programme is currently being carried out, which will inform these next stages. But following provisional confirmation by JMCEN, the procedure that had previously been agreed is that each common framework will be submitted to the relevant Assembly Committee for scrutiny prior to implementation. Arrangements are also under consideration for the management of this process, given the Scottish and Welsh elections, which will have an impact on the scrutiny timetable. In conclusion, I'd just really like to emphasise our role within EU Future Relations Division in the Common Frameworks programme is that of a central governance and oversight function across the 4 administrations and across NICS departments, where the responsibility for developing the individual common frameworks remains within the relevant departmental policy teams and ministerial portfolios. As the committee is aware, the profile of the common frameworks has increased during the passage of the Internal Market Bill and the establishment of a House of Lords Scrutiny Committee, and common frameworks remain an important area, and in conjunction with the Internal Market Act will define the relationship between the 4 areas within the UK and in managing policy divergence as we move forward. So Stephen, Michael and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have on the briefing paper or the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that presentation and the second go for yourself today, Lorraine. I suppose, really, I was just maybe to tease out, you know, there was a lot of, maybe not quite confusion, but certainly there wasn't a full understanding pre-Christmas or pre the 31st of December what was actually required by the Common Frameworks process, and there was certainly a lack of clarity around the Assembly in terms of who would have to deal with which elements of it. And I suppose in that sphere where we were before the break up for Christmas, the deal kind of has come after that. So with that deal in place, do you feel that that changes the timeline for the common frameworks and their implementation, and whether or not there is a change to the processes that would have to be followed here in the Assembly as a result?
Well, at present, there's no change to the timeline. The timeline is still that once the common frameworks receive their JMCEN provisional confirmation, they will then move to the scrutiny stage. But as I alluded to, I think we are making having some discussions within the structure, the governance structure, about whether that needs to be looked at this particular stage. And so I can't say for sure that that would be the process, that is the defined process at present, but it is certainly something that we need to look at, because the purpose of getting the frameworks through to this stage 3 by the end of the year, the end of transition, was certainly with one eye to the possibility of there being no deal in place. There is a deal in place now. There's a lot of information there. So it's something that we may have to provide to you at a future point, or write to you and say what the next process is going to be, because there's been no firm decision to change the route that we're on. But it is something I think that we seriously need to think about.
Okay, we would receive, as the Executive Office Committee that scrutinises the Executive Office, which is kind of charged with this process, albeit that there are other committees that actually deliver the scrutiny for the individual common frameworks. But there were a number of key delays in that process of scrutiny for the handful of common frameworks that were dealt with pre the 31st of December. Has there been any work undertaken by the Department to try and work out what it was that was causing that delay, why there wasn't the timely sharing of the information from London through to the department or the departmental committees here, and has that been prepared for and maybe tightened up going forward?
I think it is a key issue, and certainly the issues that were raised by the committee in their letter were helpful even for us to understand. I mean, our role at the central level has been to obviously develop central guidance for each, so that and that was developed in October, and then centrally within NICS we developed the guidance which has been shared with the committee today. I mean, we have been aware of some issues, and we've asked departments to make us aware of any difficulties in how they're engaging with their committees, to get that feedback so that we can feed it back into the overall Cabinet Office position on that as well. There was a few issues, certainly on the transport side. Some of it was to do with, and I might bring Michael or Stephen in maybe to add a little bit more detail to this, but some of the issues may be even that in some cases a paper is laid as a command paper in the House of Parliament, but the policy teams might not have understood what a command paper meant. And I think we do need to keep an eye on this. We need to understand where the guidance isn't being followed, but more importantly, we need to understand what the risk is and the impact of the guidance not being followed, because it's really important that each committee sees the same version of the document and scrutinises the same version of the document. And maybe just to hand over to Michael or Stephen if they want to add any further on the issues that some of the departments might have brought forward so far.
Okay.
I'm afraid I don't have an awful lot to add to what Lorraine has already outlined there. I mean, it's unfortunate that there was those delays, and I think we'd apologise for them. I think a lot of it was down to, unfortunately, teething issues. There was a bit of a lack of communication and misunderstanding of the process because it was the first couple that we're going through. I think there was a few cases where policy teams were expecting a bit more notice the process of laying the command paper within the UK Parliament progressed a lot more quickly than policy teams here expected it to, so they were caught on the hop. So as Lorraine's outlined, we've engaged with departments again on the guidance, and we're trying to understand all the issues that there's been so that we can rectify them before the next time happens.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask if Doug Beattie, as the Deputy Chair, if he has any questions for this section. Hello, Doug.
Sure, no, I'm okay, thank you. I was just listening there. I have no questions, thanks.
Okay, then I'll pass to Martina Anderson. Martina, if we can get you into the spotlight, then we can get you to ask a question. Okay.
Yep, that's me in, Chair. And Chair, obviously there's a crossover between the Brexit briefing that we got prior to this and this one, but I wanted to take an opportunity when Tim was in the room, given his new role in the North-South Ministerial Council. Chair, I'm a bit concerned about there being a serious democratic deficit issue because of how some of these were rushed through. And we as a committee, I think for the last 6 months and more, have had regular updates and discussions and have been flagging up what these common frameworks might mean or trying to ascertain what they do mean. So the interim arrangements in place from the 1st of January until the final frameworks are agreed I'm just wanting to know a little bit more about what they are. It surprises me a little bit that the policy team was very much caught on the hop, because we as a committee have been a bit focused on this and have been flagging them up as issues that we would need to be scrutinising. So I just make that point, but I know it's not just this committee. These are matters that are affecting all committees. So can I ask in terms of for a little bit more information around the interim arrangements that have been put in place from the 1st of January? They're going to be in place until the final frameworks are agreed. And if that is the case, then the 3 not agreed that was referred to, I didn't really hear what they were. So if we could get some information on the 3 that was mentioned that were not yet or have not yet been agreed to.
Yes, no problem. If I maybe bring Stephen in just on the process, the stage 4 and stage 5 process and where we're going to next. I mean, it's fair to say that we had to change the process as we went through the year because it was recognised that we wouldn't be able to get all of these frameworks in place, and because of the major cross-cutting issues that would affect the final form of the framework. So these are, at this stage, outline frameworks which will move on to further development, including the scrutiny process as well. And it's really important, our role in this at this stage is to make sure now there is agreement on the future relationship and also on the protocol, because we need to remember that the future relationship will interact with the protocol. They're not two separate agreements, and that's one of the things that we're undertaking at present, is to understand how both those impact. So there is considerable work for us to do in this in relation to making sure that that those factors are understood centrally in the structures that we sit in, and then making sure that our departments are challenging those as well through their individual engagement at their policy level. So if maybe I could just bring Stephen in to talk about the phase 4 and phase 5 and what you would expect to see during this year for their development.
Absolutely, Chair, and thank you, Lorraine, for that. If I can just say that the phase 3 was obviously brought forward to make sure that not having any certainty or surety with regards to the content of any negotiated outcome, that we would have working arrangements in place to make sure that there were no policy issues at the end of the transition period. And yes, we totally accept that the information that's contained in the framework outline agreements do have gaps, and those gaps will be filled as we progress through their further development for this year ahead through phases 4 and phases 5. And of course, whilst there will be empirical research and work being undertaken at policy official level, this will be informed also by further stakeholder engagement, and also, of course, through engagement with the committees and their feedback and input to the process. So it's making sure that as we move forward, that all of the outworkings of the protocol, of the agreement, and of the Internal Market Act have been fully taken into account before there's any further endorsement, either at sectoral or departmental ministerial level, or before anything's brought back to JMCEN for endorsement through that forum.
Can I just, Chair, I think it's something we just need to be mindful of, because the outline and provisional common framework, and I think you should recognise this, Stephen, from our point of view as MLAs, the scrutiny role has been very challenging, if not impossible, given the time frame, obviously, that you were working in, but we just need to be kept abreast of it. Can I ask, Chair, I think I should have asked this at the last session, but given that you're still here, maybe I could ask for the committee to be kept informed around the Joint Consultative Working Group, the membership of that, Chair. It was one of the questions I should have asked about what sectors in the north will be involved in terms of, or will they, is the question of, will businesses be involved, will civil society be involved, will trade unions be involved, or is it just civil servants and experts from that field? It was just something I should have asked earlier, sorry, Chair.
No, that's okay, and I think it'd be important to get the response as well, because I think we would have expected that that to be populated by this stage, given that we're into all of these sectors being impacted, but they've got no voice to be able to articulate what their views are. So, Lorraine, is there some indication of the various sectors that will be involved in that?
No, as I said just in the previous session, there's still there's still negotiations, I think, between the UK and the EU on what the Joint Consultative Working Group will look like, and we have certainly been asking the question. I think there's a certain amount of, December was so intense in relation to all of the decisions that needed to be taken on the protocol and getting the future relationship bill, the future relationship agreement in there, that it's almost like everybody's just gone, right, okay, we need to take a breath and where do we go next? But there's huge amount of work to do in terms of how we join all the, as I said in the last session as well, how we join all these governance structures together and how they all interact, because there are interdependencies between them. So one of the things we would like to consider is how a common framework, if it falls within the scope of the protocol, and there's the EU decides to change the regulation in that, how do we work that through the Joint Consultative Working Group? How does that interact with the Internal Market Act? How does that work with the Office of the Internal Market? How does the common framework deal with the divergence within there? So I would say that we have identified the issues and we're aware of what we need to do, but there's not a lot of clarity so far on how these governance structures will work, but they are on our radar in terms of both our involvement and how we would need to influence in those groups. And as I say, I don't think you could underestimate how all these things interact with each other.
Yeah, certainly. I think it could almost, I appreciate it's not your work, it's further up the line, even between the EU and the UK, but I suppose it almost sounds a little bit like trying to work out which comes first, the chicken or the egg, whenever there's no chicken or egg, and it's very difficult for those on the ground that are being impacted by something, but they have no method to be able to interact and articulate those concerns or request those changes in a formalised way, and that does fall back a little to what we had said with Tim earlier. There may be a number of informal ways of being able to engage and highlight where the problems are, but if it fundamentally requires agreement between the EU and the UK to be able to change something, if there's no formalised method of getting that on an agenda, that does leave a bit of a deficit. But hopefully as the weeks roll by, there will be some population of those groups and some structures put in place.
Chair, sorry,
Yes,
can I just, one wee small thing insofar as it is small. The TEO, our committee in terms, or the Executive Office, is carrying out the equality treatment legislation, the common framework that is responsible for, and that falls within the TEO committee. So I thought that the equality treatment was covered by the protocol. So I'm just a little bit confused where that is residing.
Lorraine, I think we have a sense of an update on that, is there?
I think that one is currently with ministers, as far as I know. I could bring Michael in, who would know where nearly all of them are. Michael, do you have an update on that? But I think that one is currently under consideration by ministers.
Okay.
As Lorraine says, it's with ministers for consideration. It's one that it's with the equality policy team or equality directorate within TEO rather than within our team.
Yeah.
Okay, so Chair, we should get a time frame as to when the committee will get sight of that.
Yeah, I think so, because I think maybe, Martina, there's been some suggestion that may have been getting dropped and not coming to ourselves. So maybe what we'll do is, if we write formally to the department and ask for an update on it, then we'll get the clarity that's needed. If that we can do that. Okay, in the absence of any other members indicating that they wish to speak, I think we can bring it to an end, this section. Can I thank Lorraine for presenting in both sessions, and to Stephen and Michael for coming on to this. I appreciate we were a bit delayed, so apologies if that's interrupted your day there, but thank you very much for coming along for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, if you bear with, I think next we can move all the members up into the spotlight, which brings everybody back on board again. And I suppose maybe what I could do at that stage is just ask, is there any member that wants to raise any issue? Because I appreciate that you were maybe not able to indicate. Is there anybody that wants to raise any issues on the back of the presentations? George, I'm seeing the palm of your hand there, so you're either giving me money or you're indicating that you want to speak there.
Chair, just to say that I've been here at the full presentations.
Yes.
From the beginning, and I couldn't get on whenever Arlene and Michelle were there. It's 2 or 3 questions for them, but possibly maybe due to my own fault, I'm not quite sure. But just to say, just to record that I've been at the meeting.
Okay, absolutely. I think difficulty, George, is you need to use the raise hand function, which indicates on the screen for me that you want to ask a question, because we were having various technical problems earlier of calling people in. But look, we noted that you were there the whole way through, but we won't call you in for a question. You'll need to hit that raise hand function so that we can see on the screen that you're looking to come in.
Yeah, to be honest, I did do that a couple of times.
Yes, well, we'll get you up to date with that, and that'll keep things going smoothly. But we have you recorded as being here for the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for that, Chair.
Members, we'll move on then to item 7, and if you just bear with me for the next few bits, we'll rattle through what we have to do. In terms of the forward work programme, which is on page 325 of the meeting pack, are you content to note the forward work programme? Yep. Okay, I think there might be 1 or 2 changes just to try and facilitate things, and I have we discussed it earlier, myself and Michael are trying to iron it out that we only have 2 presentations on a day and not 3, because I appreciate we're now just approaching the 3rd hour of today's meeting, and that can be tough enough. On page 330, there is correspondence from the Senate Special Select Committee on the withdrawal from the UK and the European Union, which is inviting the committee to take part in the meeting with them in January to discuss the Brexit issues. You'll know we've done a number of these with the House of Lords and with the Dáil in the past period. Are members content that we get that scheduled? I think we see the space as being maybe the 1st week of February or 2nd week of February for that. Would members be okay if we arrange that?
Content.
Okay. Item 8 is correspondence. There are 16 items of correspondence in the meeting pack. Item 8.5 on page 338 is correspondence from the Minister of Finance, which was forwarded by the Committee of Finance, indicating the delay in consideration of the draft budget. Item 8.6 of the meeting pack is correspondence from the Committee of Justice to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, asking for clarification on how the statutory duty of the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors is being carried out with regard to the establishment of the Troubles Permanent Disablement Pension Scheme, given the current vacancy. So the committee has asked, the Justice Committee has asked if our committee would keep it informed on the issue, as the Department of Justice has a role in establishing the scheme. So can I suggest that any future briefings or communication from the Executive Office in relation to this issue are shared with the Committee for Justice? Okay, agree on there. There's correspondence at 8.7 on page 341 from the Committee for Health to the Department of Health, noting a request by that committee to ask for regular briefings from an Executive Office official in relation to future health protection regulations. Are members content for the committee to write to the First and Deputy First Minister supporting the request from the Committee for Health?
Content.
And then are members content to note the rest of the items on the agenda? Great. Okay.
Chair.
Yes,
Chair, Martina here.
Yes, of course. Go on ahead.
Chair, just sorry, I didn't know what way you were dealing with them when you were running through the first one. So I just want to go back to the issue of the budget.
Yes, of course.
And the communication that we've had, because we're hearing reports that the discussion in the budget was blocked from being discussed in the executive, and that's going to impact on the consultation and planning of the draft budget. And if it has got to do with anything as is being suggested about EU funding, because that the Economy Minister has very late in the day discovered that there's 100 million being lost to her department. There's 25 million, the Department of Infrastructure. There's hundreds of millions for CAP funding, and then you have European Social Fund. But it goes back to the point that I was making earlier and asking the ministers around this shared prosperity fund, because surely we should be looking to the British government for that, because as we were promised, EU funding was going to be wasn't going to be lost. So I'm concerned that this is now being used as some kind of a barter and maybe blocking the paper from going on the executive before Christmas. If that is true, then it's going to cut down on our scrutiny time and the consultation and the planning for the budget. And I think I would like to express our concern about that.
Okay, thank you, Martina. Maybe could I suggest then, given that obviously the budget comes from the Department of Finance, but it does impact right across the executive, and the executive office would have some sort of scope on that, maybe that we would write to the First and Deputy First Minister and ask for an urgent update on the budget process, and highlighting that we feel it will impact all committees in their capacity to be able to scrutinise the budget in good time, and to ask for a timetable of when it will be delivered. Would that be?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, absolutely, Chair, but particularly because of the reports that's been suggested that it is actually the First Minister that's holding it up.
Well, absolutely. Well, we'll seek that clarity, so we'll send that off. Okay, members happy enough with that as an outcome? Okay, then we can move on to item 9, which is Chairman's business. Maybe if I could just update members that myself and the Deputy Chair met with all the representatives of the HIA groups earlier today. It was on the back of our last meeting, we were asked to do that. There were quite a number of similar issues raised by all of the various groups, and the recommendation is that myself and the Deputy Chair will meet with the clerk and look at the minutes from that, and as a note in terms of what the issues are and what we feel the next step would be, and we'll hopefully get that presented to members next week. And then the following week we have the Commissioner in as well, and then we'll be able to tie all that together after that meeting. Would that be agreeable to members? Great. Okay.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to say this one and then duck. Item 10, any other business. Members, we had said in October that we agreed to scheduling a professional development workshop on effective questioning and questioning skills in early 2021. Would members be content if we schedule that for somewhere in February, and then time permitting we'll get ourselves on for that? Okay, I'm going quick before anybody gets to unmute themselves, and then move myself on to item 11. The date, time and place of the next meeting will be here next week at 2 o'clock. And if members are content, we'll adjourn the meeting there. And thank you very much for your attendance and perseverance through a long session today. But thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.